Chapter 1080. Sage. Zhang Changzong's eyes were full of tears. He was really scared. No matter how ignorant he was, he knew what would happen if he was convicted of treason. Over the past 20 years, too many people's families had been destroyed because of treason. Wu Zetian couldn't bear to see him continue to be afraid. She said, "Now it seems that Li Hongtai was deliberately colluded with someone to lure you into the trap. However, now that this matter is known to everyone, I can't just let it go. The law is ruthless, so I can only hand him over to trial." Hearing this, Zhang Changzong turned pale with fright. He hurriedly kowtowed and said, "Sage, the officials can't wait for me to die. If you hand me over to the Ministry of Justice, I will have no chance of survival." Wu Zetian slowly said, "We will order the Assistant Minister of the Heavenly Official Wei Changqing, the Punishment Official Chui Xinqing, and the Deputy Prime Minister of the Imperial Censor Song Jing to try this case together. Wei and Chui are both officials that you recommended, so they won't make things difficult for you. When you arrive at the court, just do what you said just now." Hearing this, Shanghai Wan-er's eyes flashed. "Sage." Zhang Changzong still refused to get up. He begged, "I'd rather let the sage interrogate me personally." Wu Zetian turned her head and sighed, "Don't make trouble. You go. I will send people to keep an eye on the progress of the case." Zhang Changzong had no choice but to kowtow and leave. Wu Zetian gently waved her hand again. Wan understood, bowed, and quietly left. Quietly, Wu Zetian's reaction spread out of the palace. After hearing the news, Yang Fan was stunned for a long time. He shook his head and said with a bitter smile, "In the past, when fighting for and defending her throne, even if her own son was in her way, she would mercilessly eradicate him. As for the crime of treason, she would rather kill the wrong person than let it go. So, I thought this crime was enough to put the two Zhangs to death. I was wrong. The current Wu Zhao is no longer the Wu Zhao of the past." Yang Fan knew Wu Zetian's attitude, so did Princess Taiping. When Princess Taiping learned of her mother's attitude towards Zhang Changzong's rebellion, her expression suddenly became extremely strange. She didn't say anything and just sat there for a long time. Her eyes gradually welled up with tears. First, Mr. M.O., who was sitting at the side, noticed the strange expression on Princess Taiping's face. But even someone as experienced as him couldn't guess Princess Taiping's current state of mind. Why was it that after hearing this news, she was at a loss at first, and then her eyes glistened with tears? While first Mr. M.O. was secretly speculating, Princess Taiping's gaze gradually turned into anger and hatred. Beneath her tears, it was as if a ball of fire was brewing. When Princess Taiping heard this news, her heart was filled with sorrow, but also endless anger. She couldn't understand why her mother doted on Zhang Changzong, who was even younger than her own grandson. Yes, it was hard to hide this plan from Wu Zetian's eyes, especially when Zhang Changzong had always been by Wu Zetian's side. With his cultivation, it was hard to hide it from Wu Zetian. Wu Zetian had long known his character and ability. She knew that he couldn't rebel, but did she know nothing about her son-in-law? When the three brothers of the Xue family participated in the anti-Wu case, she clearly knew that Xue Xiao was wronged. Why didn't she spare his life? Her daughter, holding her young child, kowtowed to the imperial palace and fainted in front of the palace, but she didn't move at all. Now she was so reasonable and generous to Zhang Changzong. Princess Taiping was so angry that she gritted her teeth. Originally, she was determined to deal with the two Zhangs to avoid any variables in the process of Li Tang regaining power. But now Wu Zetian's unconditional trust and protection of Zhang Changzong aroused her jealousy and hatred. Her mother was so protective of an outsider, but cruel to her own flesh and blood. I won't stand it any more. Princess Taiping supported herself on the table and stood up. Her fingers exerted strength, and her knuckles turned white. This time, if I can't let the two Zhangs be beheaded, then I will use any means at all costs. I will do what the emperor is unwilling to do. Mo Yuhan was moved and said hesitantly, I'm afraid that the crown prince. Princess Taiping suddenly looked at him and used her sharp eyes to stop what Mr. Mo was going to say next. She said word by word, whether he is the crown prince or the emperor, no one can stop me. This is the justice I should seek. Wei Qingqing was the assistant minister of the heavenly official. He had a high position and was also the first person appointed by the emperor. So naturally he was the chief judge, and the disciplinary official Cui Xinqing and the deputy prime minister of the imperial censor Songjing were the co-judges. Wei Qingqing and Cui Xinqing were promoted because of the Tuzhong's connections. They were the disciples of the Tuzhongs, so how could they make things difficult for Zhang Changzong? As soon as Zhang Changzong entered the court, Wei Qingqing ordered people to look at the seats with a pleasant expression. Although the crime of rebellion had not yet been decided, there was no reason to look at the seats. But he was the chief judge, and Songjing did not want to be entangled in these minor details. So he pinched his nose and endured. But the so-called trial that followed was simply a farce. Wei Qingqing smilingly asked Zhang Changzong about daily life and roughly understood the process of him becoming the emperor. He said, Li Hongtai's words are really rebellious. Although the duke only took it as a joke, he must have reported it to the emperor afterward. Songjing heard this and felt that something was wrong. Wasn't this baiting a confession? Moreover, it was baiting a confession from an angle that was advantageous to the suspect. Songjing immediately stopped him and said sternly, Assistant Minister Wei, these words are very inappropriate. In reality, Wei Qingqing had overestimated Zhang Changzong's political intelligence. Zhang Changzong could not understand such an obvious hint. He was naturally skilled in music, chess, calligraphy, and painting, but he knew nothing about politics and law. He didn't know if he had told the emperor what this meant. If it was just Wei Qingqing's hint, he would most likely say in confusion, No, this duke often tells jokes in front of the emperor. But while Li Hongtai's words were a joke, they were used to flatter the emperor. This duke does not find it funny. But how could Zhang Changzong not see that Songjing was so nervous? He knew that Songjing wanted to kill him, and Wei Qingqing was his helper. Since Songjing opposed it, then it was right for him to do so. Relying on this simple method of analysis, Zhang Changzong responded with good fortune. Yes, Changzong did say this to the emperor. Songjing was furious and said sternly, Who is the witness? Punishment official Cui Xinqing immediately said, Since Duke Yi said that he knew to the emperor, then the witness is naturally the current emperor. Wei Qingqing nodded and said, Then this matter only needs to be confirmed by the emperor. Since Duke Yi once treated these words as a joke to the emperor, then even if he is guilty, it is considered surrendering, and the punishment should be reduced. Songjing said loudly, How can the great crime of rebellion be pardoned because of one sentence? According to the law, we should at least ask relevant witnesses and search Changzong's residence. Wei Qingqing's expression darkened, and he said, Those who attended the banquet that day were all nobles, dukes, and officials. You want to capture them all here as witnesses? All he had to do was send someone to inquire about it. As for searching the duke's residence, since we cannot prove his crimes, who would have the guts to search the residence of a duke? Cui Xinqing immediately said, Assistant Minister Wei's words are reasonable. Now that the truth is out, we should first report to the emperor and let him decide. Wei Qingqing and Cui Xinqing echoed each other and controlled the entire trial. Songjing, as the deputy minister of the imperial censor and the highest leader of the officials, was unable to say anything more. After Wei Qingqing finished speaking with Songjing, he said politely to Zhang Changzong, I am sorry, Duke. I will have to detain you for another day. After this lowly official reports to the emperor, I will hold a feast for you to calm down. Zhang Changzong waved his hand and boldly left the interrogation hall, making Songjing bristle with anger. The next morning, Wei Qingqing met the emperor in the Golden Hall and repeated the memorial to the emperor. Duke Yi Zhangchangzong was careless with his words and caused trouble. In this official's view, it was the warlock Li Hongtai who did not know the taboo and flattered the master as a guest. Duke Yi only thought it was a joke. The empress reported it to the emperor and did not commit any major crimes. His Majesty can take away 3 months of his salary as a punishment. As for that Li Hongtai, even though he was flattering, it was all lies. He should be punished and be brought to justice. Wu Zetian was delighted and was about to nod when the deputy minister of the imperial censor, Song Jing, came out with his scepter and said sternly, "Your Majesty, the lies of the warlocks are caused by the people. Zhang Changzong has been favored many times and his power is overwhelming, which is why the warlock flatters him. Think of that Zhang Changzong. He is young and has no contributions to the country, yet he is a duke. But he has a warlock and is inseparable. What is his purpose? He naturally harbors evil intentions and conspires against the law. He should be punished." Wu Zetian flew into a rage and said in a deep voice, "Wei Qingqing and Cui Xinqing are both main judges and have already made their judgments." As soon as she finished speaking, the assistant minister of Luantai, Cui Xianhui, came out and said in a loud voice, "Your Majesty, Wei Qingqing and Cui Xinqing were promoted because of Duke Ye's recommendation. Everyone in the world knows about this. Their judgments cannot be guaranteed to be fair. According to the law, these 2 officials should withdraw from the trial of Zhang Changzong's crimes. Therefore, this subject respectfully requests that Your Majesty retry this case." Wu Zetian suppressed her anger and said, "You are in charge of the Luantai and do not understand the law. Step down." Cui Xianhui stood tall and did not retreat. The disciplinary vice minister, Huan Yanfan, walked out and said in a loud voice, "Wei Qingqing and Cui Xinqing were promoted because of Zhang Changzong's recommendation. If Zhang Changzong is guilty, the 2 of them will also be implicated. If they share weal and woe, it will be difficult to guarantee their fairness. This subject also requests that Your Majesty retry this case." Wu Zetian had just said that Cui Xianhui did not understand the law when someone who understood the law jumped out and immediately shut Wu Zetian up. Wei Qingqing and Cui Xianhui were both assistant ministers of a yamen, while Cui Xinqing was the disciplinary minister. The one who jumped out to challenge him, Huan Yanfan, was the disciplinary vice minister and his assistant. Cui Xianhui and Huan Yanfan had publicly made things difficult for the 2 of them. This was already shedding all pretense of cordiality and no longer asking for coexistence. Wu Zetian took a deep breath and said in a clear voice, "Zhang Changzong has already turned himself into us and should be absolved of his crimes." The words of the Son of Heaven were not always law. Since ancient times, it had been thought that the words of many emperors who had fallen from power had no effect at all. However, Wu Zetian was an extremely powerful emperor. Before she had become emperor, each of her words was like an imperial edict. No one dared to disobey. But today, the officials of all the major factions had unanimously turned against the Son of Heaven, and the spearhead was pointed directly at the Son of Heaven. The civil and military officials of the court were filled with anger and moved upon hearing the news. Chapter 1081. Vice Minister of Censor Song Jing strode out and protested, "Your Majesty, even if Zhang Changzong had told you about this, he did not accuse Li Hongtai of lying." As a result, Li Hongtai was still able to escape Chang, and 3 days after the incident. This was obviously Zhang Changzong's way of getting lucky and leaving an excuse. According to the law, he is still guilty. "Your Majesty," Prime Minister Feng Chuanjin also jumped out and shouted. From this point of view, Zhang Changzong's so-called surrender was forced by the situation and not his original intention. Moreover, he is guilty of treason and will bring disaster to the country. It is not appropriate to use the rule of surrender. Zhang Changzong is so rebellious. If he does not receive the punishment, how can he use the law? Your Majesty, Imperial Censor Zhou stepped out and said loudly, "If Zhang Changzong is not punished for his crimes, he will condone the world's evil." Supervising Censor Ma Huaisu followed and said loudly, "Zhang Changzong has betrayed kindness and conspired to rebel. He should be sentenced to death." These people jumped out one by one. Even Wu Zetian's expression changed. The high and mighty emperor was not without fear. She lived high up in the imperial palace. She relied on these ministers to exert influence on the world. If all the ministers opposed her, she would naturally feel fear. She could not cut off all her hands and feet at once. Even the emperor's regenerative ability was not so strong and fast. It was impossible to find a group of suitable people to replace her immediately. But she still wanted to protect Zhang Changzong. This was not only because of her love for Zhang Changzong, but also because of her dignity and unshakable authority. However, what saddened her was that even though Heir Zhang seemed to have grasped great power under her deliberate indulgence and had many prime ministers as his disciples, not a single person jumped out to speak for them. These two little lovers, who only knew how to flirt, were even worse than Xue Huai. At least when Xue Huai was about to die, he still had two loyal disciples by his side to accompany him to the underworld. Wu Zetian could not forcefully reject the advice of so many ministers. She still wanted to maintain her image as a fair and just ruler, so she looked at Prime Minister Yang Zixi. Yang Zixi understood and could only bite the bullet and step forward. He said solemnly, "His Majesty already knows. You can all leave first. If His Majesty has further instructions, I will pass it on to you." Song Jing said coldly, "The Emperor is very close to me. I have to listen to the Emperor's orders personally. There is no need for His Majesty to announce it for me." Yang Zixi's face froze. He did not expect Song Jing to not even give him face. He did not expect Song Jing to not even him. The court was completely silent. The officials held their breath and quietly observed the Emperor's reaction. Wu Zetian sat on the high throne. She tried hard to see the expressions of the officials, but there was a blur in front of her. She could not see anything. Wu Zetian felt a heavy pressure on her chest, as if she couldn't breathe. She didn't know if she would faint on the spot if this continued. She only knew that she had to hold on no matter what. If she fainted on the throne today, it would be an irreversible blow to her authority. The unparalleled prestige she had built up over the years would collapse in a single night. Since the officials insist that Changzong is guilty, Wu Zetian pursed her lips and took a few deep breaths without anyone noticing. She was already a little suffocated. Then Wei Qingqing hand Zhang Changzong over to the censorate for Zhongqing Song's review. After Wu Zetian said this, she immediately stood up. The eunuch hurriedly waved his horsetail whisk and loudly announced, "Court dismissed." Finishing, he rushed forward and supported Wu Zetian. The officials did not shout farewell, "Your Majesty," like they did in the past. Everyone stood there and quietly watched the old woman walk with difficulty. She was supported by the eunuchs and slowly moved to the rear palace. Their gazes became extremely complicated. They suddenly realized that there were times when the person who was like a supreme god in their hearts would yield and lower her head. A thought flashed in many people's minds at the same time. The Empress's era is about to end, however Wu Zetian was, after all, Wu Zetian. She entered the palace at 13. From a small talent, she fought with Consort Xiaoshu, with Empress Wang, with Zhangsun Wuji, with Shangguan Yi, with her husband, children, and the countless civil and military officials loyal to Li Tang. She fought until today, from a talent, from a woman, all the way to the highest position in the empire. She would not easily admit defeat. The reason she had lowered her head in court today was because of the sudden change. Her extremely old body could no longer withstand such a powerful mental blow. If the stalemate had continued, she would have fainted on the spot. If the emperor had fainted on the spot under the pressure of the officials, it would have forced the power she still had to immediately find another way out. Then she would truly be alone. Wu Zetian was supported back to the rear palace. She immediately summoned the imperial doctors to treat her. After the court session ended, Vice Minister of the Imperial Censor Song Jing immediately entangled Wei Qingqing. He wanted to immediately escort Zhang Changzong to the Imperial Censor. Wei Qingqing naturally did not want to hand Zhang Changzong over so easily. He delayed it all the way until evening, but he did not receive any further orders from Wu Zetian. Seeing that he was about to be dismissed, he did not have any reason to continue dragging things out. Only then did he reluctantly hand Zhang Changzong over to Song Jing. It was already late, and Song Jing could not hold a night trial. The relevant witnesses were all nobles and officials. He could not invite them to the imperial censor in the middle of the night. So, he threw Zhang Changzong into prison to await a trial the next day. Early the next morning, Song Jing escorted Zhang Changzong to the main hall and personally tried him. Zhang Changzong was filled with despair and fear. He thought that Wu Zetian had abandoned him. When he was escorted to the main hall, his face was pale and his legs were trembling. He had completely lost his original arrogance. Song Jing sat down with a solemn expression and ordered the trial to begin. However, just as he verified Zhang Changzong's identity according to legal procedures and before he could summon all the witnesses, Wu Zetian's counterattack began. The actions of hundreds of officials to force her to abdicate was a heavy blow to Wu Zetian. Her old body could not endure such a heavy blow. She fell ill, but after a night of treatment and using an old ginseng over 500 years old to nourish her energy had recovered greatly by the next morning. Thus, she weakly and calmly gave her first order. Following her order, a vice minister suddenly appeared in front of the imperial censor with 8 internal attendants. Behind them stood 16 internal guards. The vice minister slowly unfurled the imperial edict and loudly announced in a reserved and arrogant tone, "Special pardon! The emperor has decided to pardon all of Zhang Changzong's crimes. Vice Minister Song, please immediately hand over Duqi." Finishing, he didn't wait for Song Jing to react before waving his hand. 2 tall and strong internal attendants rushed up, picked up Zhang Changzong and turned to leave. Song Jing stood up from behind the table, dumbstruck. Special pardon had existed since the Xia dynasty. This was the privilege of the monarch. Even in the modern era, the power of special pardon still existed. Even though no monarch had ever used this power in the last several thousand years, it had always been preserved in the law. It was completely in accordance with the law. Didn't Song Jing and the officials of the court say it was based on the law? Good. If you want to fight, then I, Wu Mei, will fight with you. As the emperor, I have the power of special pardon. I cannot stop you from convicting Zhang Changzong, but I have the power to pardon all of his crimes, even if they are crimes that require death. There was no need for Song Jing to continue the trial because, even if he put all of Zhang Changzong's heinous crimes on him, Wu Zetian could still use the emperor's ultimate weapon to pardon all of his crimes. Wu Zetian's counterattack began. It was still filled with the unique fighting style of the Wu clan, domineering, swift and fierce. And this was only the first punch of Wu Zetian's counterattack. I should have immediately used the punishment. I should have taken him to the main hall and immediately beaten him to death. At most, it would have been an improper punishment. As long as I can get rid of this evil, I will not fear the future. It was not until the Zhongguan left with Zhang Changzong that Song Jing finally reacted. He pounded the desk and cried out loudly. Although Zhang Changzong had only been in prison for 1 night, he was already disheveled. After returning to Fengchen prison, he tearfully complained to Zhang Yiji and was urged by Zhang Yiji to take a bath and change clothes. Then, Zhang Yiji took him to give thanks to the emperor. When they arrived at Changxing courtyard, the two didn't dare to enter like before. Instead, they first ordered the internal attendants to report. In the bedroom, Wu Zetian was awake for a while in the morning. Then, she began to have a headache and nausea. Her chest felt stuffy. She had just summoned the imperial doctor to administer medicine and acupuncture before falling into a deep sleep. In her sleep, the corner of Wu Zetian's mouth would occasionally twitch. Wan and Fu Qingqing, the two most important female officials of the internal court, stood to her left and right. Looking at Wu Zetian's condition, they were secretly worried. Even though Wan didn't agree with all of Wu Zetian's actions, the two of them had lived together for such a long time. Even though Wu Zetian was the murderer of her grandfather and father, at that time, when was still a baby in swaddling clothes. She didn't have any feelings for her father and grandfather. Seeing Wu Zetian grow old like this, she still felt a faint sadness in her heart. An internal attendant tiptoed in and whispered a few words into Wan ear. Wan nodded and turned to walk out of Wu Zetian's bedroom. As soon as Zhang Yiji and Zhang Changzong saw Wan they quickly came to greet her. Wan said, "The saint is not feeling well and has just fallen asleep. We can't wake her now. Wulong, Lulang, you don't have to worry. The saint has absolute trust in you and will protect you." Wan paused and then said to Zhang Changzong, before His Majesty went to sleep, he said that if Lu Lang comes back, please go to Prime Minister Song's manor and thank him for being merciful. Zhang Changzong suddenly said, "It was the saint who saved me. Song Jing was afraid that I wouldn't die. How could he be merciful? Zhang Yiji pulled his sleeve and nodded to Wan "Yes, Yiji will go with Lu Lang now." After a moment of silence, he sadly sighed and said, "We two brothers have never had any ambition. Why do the officials have to see us as a thorn in their side? I hope this time Song Zhongqing can accept our sincerity. We don't want to fight with anyone. We just want to live well." At the end, his voice was choking. In the evening, Zhang Yiji and Zhang Changzong came back. After the two returned to the palace, they immediately went to Wu Zetian's bedroom. Wu Zetian had already woken up. Hearing that they were back, she let them in. Wu Zetian smiled and said, "You're back. Did Song Jing see you?" Zhang Yiji and Zhang Changzong stood in front of Wu Zetian with their hands down. Zhang Yiji sadly said, "We two brothers are under Song Zhongqing's tutelage. We begged for 4 hours, but he refused to see us. It was getting late. If we were late, we wouldn't be able to return to the palace. So we came back." The corner of Wu Zetian's eyes twitched, but she still had a smile on her face. She weakly waved to them. The two immediately rushed to her side and knelt down. With tears in their eyes, they held her old and cold hands. "As long as I am still alive, I can always protect you," Wu Zetian gently said. Then she gently sighed and said, "But I don't know how long I can live, and you are still too young." She gently stroked Zhang Changzong's young and firm cheeks. She softly said, "Don't worry. I will arrange everything. Everything will be arranged." Her cloudy eyes surged with confidence and unyielding light. She knew that she was old, and she knew that she was about to die, but she still believed that as long as she had one breath left, everything in the world would continue to be in her hands. Chapter 1082. In August of the 4th year of Chang, and Wu Zetian was bedridden. At the beginning of September, there was a sudden change in the weather. It snowed heavily in Chang. The strange weather caused a lot of rumors. As early as late August, the Turkic general who had previously submitted to Wu Zhou, Chili Wenchong, suddenly rebelled. The news reached Chang, and in mid-September. After Wu Zetian listened to the military reports from her sickbed, she immediately issued a decree appointing Prime Minister Yao Chong as the Linggu Dao's ambassador to pacify the rebellion. Although Yao Chong was a civil official, he had practiced martial arts since childhood and knew about military affairs. Back when the Khitanans had rebelled, Yao Chong had submitted many petitions to the Empress. His analysis of the military situation was very thorough, and he was always right on the mark. Wu Zetian had thought of him as a genius, which was why she had promoted him to the position of assistant minister of the Xia Empire, and now he was the prime minister. Therefore, it was reasonable for Wu Zetian to send him to lead the army. At this time, no one realized that this was the second wave of counterattack launched by Wu Zetian against the officials. The bedridden Wu Zetian did not give up her desire for power after careful consideration. She was about to start a series of personnel appointments. She wanted to adjust the power structure of the imperial court according to her vision. Yao Chong was about to lead the army, so there was a vacancy in the prime minister's position. According to tradition, Wu Zetian had to ask the prime minister who had retired or left their posts due to other accidents. In fact, the political affairs hall was overcrowded with prime ministers. There had never been so many prime ministers in the past. But how many prime ministers could be as smart and capable as Cin Zhongqian, Ren Jigu, Pei Xingbin, Di Renjie, and Wei Yuanzhong? The current prime minister was either a flatterer like Yang Zixi, who sat in his position without doing anything, or a treacherous person like Su Weiwei, who was hesitant and ambiguous. On the other hand, Wu Zetian was old and weak. She did not have enough energy to deal with so many affairs of the country. She now relied on the prime ministers more than ever, so she needed someone who could really do things. Yao Chong recommended Assistant Minister Qiu Guanzhong Jinji to Wu Zetian. Wu Zetian recalled that Elder Di had also recommended him, so she gladly agreed. Of course, Wu Zetian knew that since Yao Chong recommended Zhang Jinji, then Zhang Jinji must have the same aspirations as Yao Chong. However, she also knew that she needed such a person to govern the country. No matter what, Zhang Jinji had just become the prime minister and was ranked last among the prime ministers. He should not be as extreme as Yao Chong. After a period of time, when the foundation of this invitation was gradually established, like Yao Chong when he was too big to be removed, she could just replace him. In the 20 years that she had been in power as the Empress Dowager and the Emperor, she had changed more than 70 prime ministers. Since ancient times, there had never been an emperor who changed their prime ministers as frequently as she did. She had long been familiar with this move. What's more, Zhang Jinji was the same age as her and was already 80 years old. She did not have many days left to live. Zhang Jinji was so old. What kind of storm could he stir up? Therefore, Wu Zetian relaxed her vigilance against him. After Yao Chong led the army into battle, Zhang Jinji was appointed as the administrator of Luantai of the Phoenix Pavilion. He entered the political affairs hall and became the current prime minister. The day Zhang Jinji paid his respects to the prime minister was the 22nd day of the 10th month in the 4th year of Chong. And on the 23rd day, Wu Zetian appointed Wei Sili, the assistant minister of the Phoenix Pavilion, as the administrator of Wei Province. On the 30th day, Wu Zetian appointed Fang Rong, the assistant minister of Huaizhou, as the administrator of Wei Province. On the 5th day of the 11th month, Wu Zetian appointed Wei Changqing, the assistant minister of Heavenly Official, as the assistant minister of the Phoenix Pavilion. The series of appointments was like an airtight combination of punches, mercilessly punched out. Wei Sili and Wei Qingqing were brothers. When the two brothers entered the cabinet at the same time to pay their respects to the prime minister, it caused a sensation. What made people wary was that these two brothers were close to the second Zhang. As for Fang Rong, the assistant minister of Huaizhou, he had once participated in the compilation of the Pearl of the Three Schools and was now part of the second Zhang faction. While Wu Zetian was making these changes, she had been bedridden the entire time. These edicts had all been issued through the internal court, causing the people to grow increasingly suspicious. Many people said that these edicts had not been issued by the Empress, that the Empress was already seriously ill and unconscious, and that this was the second Zhang's fake edicts to expand his own power. In truth, although Wu Zetian was bedridden and had even stopped attending court, she was not so weak that she could not see things. At the very least, she had summoned the prime ministers in front of her. She had spoken clearly and thought clearly in front of them. However, the Crown Prince's faction, the Prince of Xiang's faction, the Prince of Liang's faction, and the other factions naturally would not stand out to refute these rumors. These rumors were beneficial to them, and they were happy to see them. Many of these rumors had actually been fabricated and spread by their own people. When Wu Zetian promoted 3 of the second Zhang's henchmen into the political faction, she set out to remove the second thorn in her side. Ever since Wei Yuanzhong had been demoted, Yao Chong had become the highest representative of the anti-Zhang faction in the political affairs hall, the first thorn in Wu Zetian's eyes. Now that Yao Chong had been dispatched to Linggu to quell the rebellion, the second important leader of the anti-Zhang faction, Song Jing, had become a thorn that she urgently needed to remove. Wu Zetian issued an edict ordering Song Jing to go to Yangzhou, Yuzhou, Longyu, and Bashu. Of these 4 places, one was in the east, one was in the north, one was in the west, and one was in the south. If Jiaozhi was added, then Song Jing would have to go around the borders of the Wuzhou Empire. Even if Song Jing wanted to go through these 4 places, it would take him at least a year or 2. Song Jing knew that Wu Zetian wanted to transfer him out of the capital. He was the deputy minister of the imperial censor. Once he left, the empress could replace the important position of the imperial censor with the second Zhang's faction. At that time, the second Zhang's position would be even harder to shake. Therefore, Song Jing brazenly resisted the edict and refused to leave. Song Jing ran into the palace and stood in front of Wu Zetian. He righteously and sternly refused. As the deputy minister of the imperial censor, I have the responsibility of supervising the hundreds of officials, and the imperial court is the center of the hundreds of officials. Therefore, the deputy minister cannot leave the imperial court unless it is an important matter of the country. If it is not an important matter of the country, I cannot leave. Song Jing's act made Wu Zetian very angry. However, Wu Zetian did not want to make her purpose too obvious, so she could only swallow her anger. However, with her series of actions in this short period of time, as long as one was not blind, who could not see what she wanted to do, facing the Empress's counterattack, the officials were in fear and trepidation. What they were most worried about was that Wu Zetian's illness had not improved. Every day, only second Zhang could serve the emperor. The time that the officials could see the emperor was getting less and less. They were worried that second Zhang would take the risk and forge an imperial edict when the empress was in danger. If such a scene really happened, even if they could still control the situation, they would not be able to stand on their feet in the law. In the history books, they would definitely be marked as rebels and traitors. This was something they could not tolerate. Prime Minister Cui Xianwei could not hold back and went to the harem to see the empress. He suggested to her, "The crown prince and the prince of Xiang are your majesty's biological sons. They are benevolent, filial, and good enough to serve your majesty's soup and medicine. Your majesty should order the 2 princes to serve by your side. It is better not to let people of different surnames freely enter and exit the palace." Wu Zetian smiled faintly and said, "Prime Minister Cui's good intentions. I am grateful for your hospitality." However, Wu Zetian did not accept Cui Xuanwei's suggestion. The officials became even more anxious. They were already completely opposed to second Zhang, but now the sword that should belong to the emperor was in second Zhang's hands. No one could predict what would happen next. The sword was already hanging over their heads. They only had one choice: rise up and resist. Chapter 1083. 80 years old was considered a very old age in modern times. During the Tang dynasty, it was considered a very old age. It was almost unimaginable that such an old man could still have such exuberant energy, meticulous thinking, and be able to handle heavy and complicated government affairs. But it didn't mean it didn't exist. Zhang Jianji, who was a late bloomer, was such an anomaly. He had been a county lieutenant until he was over 60 years old. If it was someone else, they would have retired and returned to their hometown. But Zhang Jianji, who had just survived, seemed to be glowing with vitality. He became the prime minister at the age of 80 and would soon enter a new year. By then, he would be 81 years old. In the study, Zhang Jianji, who had just paid his respects to the prime minister, pressed a piece of snow-white paper, and hung a brush on it. The tip of the brush was drooping, like the sharp tip of a spear. He pondered for a while and waved. Qingtian white, crane danshan phoenix, wenu hung send me off. In front of whose peerless tent, bright powder and fragrant rouge reflect the jewel. Graceful jade hall with green curtains, uneven embroidery hanging bead foil. Peerless 3 or 5 love red makeup. Long sleeves with the fragrance of orchids. Spring goes and flowers change easily, but the years don't wait for each other. Spring goes and flowers change easily, but the years don't wait for each other. Yes, for him, who was 80 years old, it was already time for no one to wait for him. He became the Prime Minister, a high-ranking official. It could be said that he had achieved the highest achievement of an official's life. He should be satisfied. However, what could he do as the Prime Minister? Assist the Emperor to govern the world like Feng Du and create a peaceful and prosperous era? That would take at least several decades. It was impossible for him to live for that long. Be like Di Renjia, bring order out of chaos, turn the tide, save the fate of the country and maintain the vitality of the country? That was not something that could be done in a year or two. Although his body was still very healthy, when he reached the age of 80, what he most often thought of was the date of death. When death became something that he could face at any time, he had a very urgent feeling. When he was nearly 70 years old, he finally jumped out of the small county that he had been squatting in for his entire life and truly embarked on the road to the pinnacle of power. When he was 80 years old, he finally became the head of all the officials. His life's ambition was to make a name for himself and restore the Li Tang Empire. However, he didn't have much time left. Therefore, anyone could wait, but he couldn't. Time passed quickly, especially for him. He had just taken the position of Prime Minister and had not even warmed his seat yet. However, he did not have the time to do a good job as a Prime Minister step by step. He had to seize every minute. Lang, they are here. The old man who had served him all his life walked up to him with a hunched back and whispered to him. Zhang Genji, who was studying the poem carefully, said in a deep voice, "Invite them in." After a short moment, the sound of rustling footsteps resounded, and Song Jing, Cui Xianhui, Yang Yuanyan, Huan Yanfan, Yuan Shuji, and Jing Hui walked in successively. Zhang Genji had just become the Prime Minister, but in the year he had been the autumn officer, he had not been idle. He had long gathered his strength and contacted his comrades, all for this day. Yao Chong had been lured away. Before he left office, he strongly recommended Zhang Genji and pushed this old man, who was more radical than him, to be the Prime Minister. The candlelight flickered, and the room was quiet. Everyone who entered the study had a serious look on their faces. They had already guessed what Zhang Genji wanted to discuss with them. At this time, Zhang Genji was the Assistant Minister of the Autumn Official and the Minister of Justice. The Assistant Minister of the Heavenly Official Cui Xianhui was the Deputy Minister of the Organization Department. The Deputy Minister of the Imperial Censor, Song Jing, was the Chief Prosecutor of the Supreme Procuratorate. The Right Minister of Zhongtai, Jing Hui, was the Deputy Secretary General of the State Council. The Junior Minister of Punishment, Huan Yanfan, was the Deputy President of the Supreme Court. No one knew what they were discussing. The voices in the study were sometimes high and sometimes low. Sometimes they were passionate, and sometimes they were low and depressed. When the old steward delivered the supper at midnight, he found that the faces of these important officials were all strangely flushed, and their eyes were bright with excitement. They didn't look tired at all. The next morning, the officials who hadn't slept all night quietly bid farewell. They boarded their unmarked carriages and silently left the Prime Minister's mansion. A secret operation began quietly on this day. Zhang Genji had just become the Prime Minister, and the end of the year was approaching. He should pay a formal visit to the important figures who were above the Prime Minister. Taking advantage of this convenience, Zhang Genji first visited the Crown Prince. Li Xian didn't know much about Premier Zhang, which was why he didn't know the latter's style of doing things. He had thought that Zhang Jianji was just greeting him out of courtesy, and that was why he had put on a fake smile on his face. He had planned to stand up and see Zhang Jianji out after chatting with him for a bit. However, Zhang Jianji's straightforward words startled him. Li Xian stuttered. The second Zhang doesn't have great ambitions. I don't think he will cause any harm, Zhang Jianji said. Among the second Zhang, Zhang Changzong is really incompetent and not a threat. However, although Zhang Yiji isn't very resourceful, he is also very cunning. Moreover, they have many henchmen, and there are many ambitious people among them. Who knows if they will instigate the second Zhang to do anything in desperation? Li Xian said hurriedly, the second Zhang's identity is awkward. He is neither a member of the royal family nor a relative of the emperor. Even if he wants to rebel, he won't succeed. Zhang Jianji didn't expect Li Xian to be so timid. However, Li Xian was the crown prince, a symbol of righteousness. Zhang Jianji had to get his approval to ensure that his actions would be justified. Only with his approval could all his actions have a legal and reasonable basis. Since he had to win over this person, Zhang Jianji could only continue to persuade him. Crown Prince, the Empress is critically ill, and the palace is strictly guarded. Only the second Zhang can come and go freely. Once they have wild ambitions and forge an imperial edict, after the emperor passes away, they will have the emperor's posthumous edict and the help of their best friends. The country will fall into their hands. Even if they don't have the support of powerful military figures, we will still be on the defensive. At that time, even if we kill the treacherous officials, it will be hard to avoid being labeled as a traitor in the annals of history. Thus, we must kill them first to prevent future troubles. Li Xian's face was ashen. He repeatedly shook his head and said, No, the Empress is still here. Presumably, the Empress has made appropriate arrangements for everything. This Guaran is the Emperor's subject and the Empress's son. How can I act without authorization and rebel against my superiors? Zhang Jianji raised his white brows and said, Crown Prince, this is not rebelling against your superiors. It is to bring order out of chaos, to use military force to purge the emperor's vassals. Li Xian shook his head like a rattledrum. You can't. It won't work. This absolutely cannot work. Zhang Jianji had said all sorts of good words, but Li Xian still refused. Zhang Jianji frowned and could only change his words. Since the crown prince does not agree, this old subject naturally cannot act without authorization. However, one cannot have the intention to harm others, but one cannot lack the heart to guard against others. This old subject wishes to unite many loyal officials, just in case. If the second Zhang does not act, I will not act either. This is only for self-protection. Will the crown prince allow this? When Li Xian heard this, he felt that these words were still acceptable. If the second Zhang really planned to rebel and start a mutiny, he would have to protect himself no matter what. It was necessary for the loyal officials to take some precautions. He was about to agree, but he swallowed the words back down. He was afraid that once he agreed, it would be difficult for him to escape. Once the Empress found out and investigated, it would be a great crime. As a result, Li Xian deceived himself and said, This Guaran is the heir apparent. The Emperor is still here. This Guaran should not participate in political affairs. Master Zhang is the current Prime Minister, assisting the Emperor, in charge of all the officials guarding the feudal vassals and taking care of the tens of thousands of commoners. What you should and shouldn't do is up to Master Zhang. There is no need to ask this Guaran. Li Xian's son and daughter had both been killed by the second Zhang. As their father, this was a blood feud. However, when he heard that Zhang Jianji was going to act against the second Zhang, he was still so afraid. Zhang Jianji couldn't help but bitterly smile. However, he had at least received a word from the second Zhang. Whatever he did next, he would be able to use the second Zhang's name. Zhang Jinji could not say anything else, lest the second Zhang panic and make it clear that he did not support Zhang Jinji's actions. If that happened, it would be difficult to rally the officials loyal to the crown prince. Thus, Zhang Jinji clasped his hands and took his leave. This old subject understands. This old subject will take his leave. The second person Zhang Jinji visited was the Prince of Xiang. Under the pressure of his powerful mother, the Prince of Xiang's personality was not very resolute. However, compared to his seventh brother, Li Xian, Li Dan was clearly a little more hot-blooded. Perhaps it was because his outstanding sons had a greater influence on him. Hearing Zhang Jinji's words, Li Dan remained silent for a long time. Zhang Jinji thought to himself, the Prince of Xiang won't be as cowardly as the Crown Prince, right? Li Dan lowered his eyelids. After thinking for a long time, he suddenly opened his eyes and sternly asked, "The Crown Prince has already given his consent." Zhang Jinji was afraid of scaring him away, so he vaguely replied, "The Crown Prince has promised this old subject that he can act as he sees fit." Li Dan bluntly asked, "What does Master Zhang want this prince to do?" Zhang Jinji replied, "Your Highness was once the Emperor and also the Crown Prince. Your reputation is grand. We still need your Highness's full support. If the second Zhang is scheming and urgently needs to respond, the Crown Prince must oversee the central command. At that time, only your Highness's status and reputation will allow you to oversee the 9 cities. As for now, we still need your Highness." Zhang Jinji's train of thought was very clear, and he explained everything clearly. After hearing him out, Li Dan resolutely said, "Fine, this prince will give Master Zhang all his consent." Saying this, he stood up and solemnly clasped his hands to Zhang Jinji. Zhang Jinji hurriedly rose to avoid the greeting and asked, "What is your Highness doing?" Li Dan solemnly said, "On behalf of the ancestors of the Li clan, this prince thanks Master Zhang. If this matter succeeds, Master Zhang will be the great benefactor of my Li clan." Zhang Jinji took his leave from the Prince of Xiang's residence, and then went to pay a visit to the Prince of Liang, Wu Sanxi. However, he would not be frank with Wu Sanxi. If he wanted to be frank, he would have to depend on the person. He knew that no matter how straightforward he was with the Crown Prince and the Prince of Xiang, he did not need to worry that they would run off to the Emperor to inform him. However, the Wu clan depended on Wu Zetian. The Wu clan controlled the largest armed force of the Wu state. If he wanted to carry out a military remonstrance, he could not do so without the Wu clan's support or acquiescence. However, he did not intend to personally discuss this matter with Wu Sanxi. Not long after Zhang Jinji left the Prince of Xiang's residence, the Prince of Xiang prepared a carriage and went straight to Princess Taiping's residence to find his little sister, Li Lingyue. An invisible net was quietly being woven in Chang, and as the spider with the most sensitive sense of touch, Yang Fan was quietly lying in a corner, as if he had already sent something. Chapter 1084. This time, the Prince of Xiang truly did not want to watch with folded arms. Last time, he had stayed out of the affair because the Crown Prince was the main cause. But the Crown Prince himself was cowering and cowering. The main cause himself had not taken the initiative, but now he was being asked to take the risk to speak up for Wei Yuanzhong. The Prince of Xiang was angry, but he was no saint and did not want to bring disaster upon himself. But at the time he had not realized that his mother was so protective of Second Zhang that she would even blindly shield a heinous crime. The ministers had joined forces to wage war against Second Zhang, and even though they had the legal foundation, they had still been defeated by his mother's partiality. The Prince of Xiang felt afraid. As an important member of the Li clan, his interests were intertwined with the Crown Prince's. If Second Zhang really was allowed to control the Emperor and seize power, the consequences would be unthinkable. Now that the Crown Prince had decided to take the initiative, the Prince of Xiang naturally would not pass on this responsibility. In order to carry out such a major undertaking, The Prince of Xiang immediately thought of Princess Taiping. He knew that this sister controlled an enormous political force, and he was even more aware that, in terms of courage and intelligence, this sister was superior to both him and his seventh brother. Besides this sister was also the daughter-in-law of the Wu clan, and the Wu clan currently controlled the majority of the armed forces in the capital. If he wanted to carry out a military remonstrance, he could not bypass the Wu clan. He had to communicate with the Wu clan, and this sister was the most suitable candidate, so he had to pull her into this matter. Princess Taiping met with her brother in the study. Li Dan did not conceal anything in front of his sister. As soon as he sat down, he bluntly stated the purpose of his visit. Li Dan first recounted the events of Zhang Jianji's visit to him today. He then said to Princess Taiping, "Second Zhang is so favored, it is really beyond your brother's expectations. With mother's serious illness and second Zhang in control of the palace, it is even more worrisome. I feel that it is time to take special measures." Princess Taiping's delicate brows perked up as she asked, "How confident does Brother Wang think they are?" Li Dan shook his head. "Not them, but us. They have already remonstrated with Mother. But what was the result? It is impossible to rely on just a group of civil officials. This time, we must carry out a military remonstrance. Only if the Crown Prince, you, me, and the Wu clan are of the same mind and work together will there be a chance of success." Princess Taiping asked. The Crown Prince agreed? Li Dan nodded. "Yes. Zhang Jianji said it himself." Princess Taiping heaved a sigh of relief and murmured, "In other words, this time we are fighting against the Emperor with all our power." Li Dan laughed bitterly. When Song Jing accused the second Zhang of being a prime minister, he had already used all the power of the court, but didn't he still suffer a crushing defeat? This time we need the full cooperation of the Li and Wu clans. But most importantly, since it is a military remonstrance, we need to use force. Force is the foundation. Princess Taiping slowly stood up and paced in the room. Her skirt swayed gently with her movements like the rhythm of water. Li Dan knew that for such an important matter, her sister needed to consider it carefully. The main point of her consideration was not whether or not she would participate, but how likely it was to succeed. Princess Taiping paced back and forth for a long time before she suddenly stopped and resolutely said to Li Dan, "Right now, Mother is seriously ill and has not appeared in court for a long time. Imperial edicts have been passed down from the rear palace, and the second Zhang's henchmen have been repeatedly promoted. Only by carrying out a military remonstrance, killing the second Zhang, and purging the emperor's side, could they turn the situation around. Ling Yu is willing to follow you two brothers and carry out this important matter together." Li Dan said cheerfully, "I knew that you would agree." Princess Taiping's eyes flashed. "How much force do you have now?" Li Dan shook his head. "Right now, it is still too early to talk about force. We must first determine how many allies we have and who is willing to participate. Only then can we divide the work and discuss the specific plan. Right now, I only know that no matter how many people participate, our only option is to carry out a military remonstrance. And there is only one way to carry out a military remonstrance. If we try to use any other means to reach the palace and kill the second Zhang, Mother will have enough time to mobilize the troops and quell the riot." Princess Taiping said in a low voice, "The Black Tortoise Gate." Li Dan nodded forcefully. "Yes, it is the Black Tortoise Gate. Right now, there are 1,000 cavalrymen guarding the Black Tortoise Gate, and their commander is Yang Fan. This person is of utmost importance. Do you have the confidence to make him stand on our side?" Taiping was silent, and Li Dan was in no hurry to press him. Although as Taiping's brother, no one would be stupid enough to publicize the love affair between Taiping and Yang Fan in front of him, he had more or less heard about it. However, he did not think that this relationship could guarantee that Yang Fan would stand on their side. They thought that they were carrying out a military remonstrance against the emperor, But to the emperor, this was no different from plotting a rebellion. Once they failed, the result would be the death of their family. When faced with the great crime of rebellion, there had been cases of wives suing their husbands and sons suing their fathers. This had happened before in history. Things like love and affection could not guarantee anything. Yang Fan had a family, a career, and a fourth-rank official. He was a rational and mature adult. He would definitely not choose to stand on the other side on such an important matter because of love and affection. So, if Taiping rashly believed in Yang Fan, he would instead have to remind his sister to be careful. Taiping was silent for a long time before he slowly said, "I will first probe his mouth on this matter before deciding whether or not to tell him everything." Li Dan breathed a sigh of relief and showed an admiring look. She said, "This is a serious matter and we should be extra careful. Yang Fan is the key, and the other key is the Wu family. The Wu family controls the elites of the Northern Office. If the Wu family does not agree to the military remonstrance, the possibility of success of this plan is very small." Princess Taiping nodded and said, "After several years of recuperation, we have indeed accumulated a force in the imperial court. But the biggest problem is that we have never had the opportunity to control the military power. During the military remonstrance, it may not take many people to rush into the palace and kill Zhang. But to control the palace and the imperial city, we must have the military power in our hands. And without the consent of the Wu family, who now controls the military power, we have no chance." Li Dan said, "So, we must persuade the Wu family to cooperate with us." Princess Taiping nodded and said, "Leave it to me." The brother and sister discussed it again, because now was the time to connect all forces, and the allies had not been determined. They could not determine the specific military remonstrance plan, so they could not discuss too many specific things. It was a very common thing for Li Dan to visit her sister, but because the two were now planning an earth-shattering event, they naturally felt a little guilty. Li Dan did not dare to stay for a long time. Seeing that it was almost time, she hurriedly said goodbye. Taiping sent her brother away and returned to the study to sit down. After thinking for a long time, she looked up at the dust on the ceiling and said slowly, "Emperor Gaozu wanted to establish Jianqing, but Emperor Taizong launched a mutiny in Xuanwu Gate and took back everything he was about to lose. Do you think if we launch another mutiny in Xuanwu Gate, can we succeed like Emperor Taizong?" There was no one else in the study except for her, but her tone did not sound like she was asking herself, "So who is she talking to?" Behind Princess Taiping was a screen with flowers in bloom and riches on it. Beautiful and delicate peonies were painted on the screen. Following Princess Taiping's question, a person quietly walked out from behind the screen. He was tall and slender, and his clothes were as light as snow. His handsomeness revealed an exuberant, heroic spirit. It was Yang Fan. Yang Fan did not come today to inform Princess Taiping. Although he had already faintly sensed some signs because he had many tentacles, he only knew that Zhang Genji and some other people were secretly contacting each other through his people. As for the specific content of their discussion, he naturally did not know. In this kind of situation, he would not reveal the information that could not even be counted as groundless rumors to Taiping. Even if he already knew all the inside information, he would not hastily come to Taiping and tell him everything. He would definitely think of a more appropriate method first. Otherwise, with Taiping's intelligence, he would definitely immediately realize that he controlled a huge force. In fact, Yang Fan came today because he sensed that Zhang Genji and a group of his henchmen seemed to have a plot. He was not sure whether Princess Taiping was also one of the participants in the secret, so he came today to inquire about the information from Princess Taiping. As a result, Li Dan suddenly came to visit and he heard everything. Princess Taiping could have placed him somewhere else, but she did not think that there was any secret that could be hidden from Yang Fan. She did not want her lover to think that she treated him as an outsider, so she let him hide behind the screen. As a result, he heard all the plan to carry out the military remonstrance. From this point of view, Women and men were indeed innately very different. Men were always relatively more rational. If it was Yang Fan, even if it wasn't a secret like the succession hall, which was absolutely unacceptable under the standpoint of peace, as long as it was a secret, he wouldn't rashly let her know. Even if Yang Fan did not have the sensitive identity of the succession hall master of the obvious sect and had no secrets that he could hide from her, he would rather think carefully before revealing it to her. Most women were not so rational when it came to feelings. Even the heavens' pride Wu Zetian could not avoid this. Naturally, she could not demand Taiping. The Black Tortoise Gate was the only choice to carry out the military remonstrance. Sooner or later, Yang Fan would be pulled in, now that Yang Fan had heard everything. Princess Taiping simply bypassed the normal process of probing, contacting, and joining hands, and directly discussed the important matter with him. Man proposes, God disposes. Yang Fan said the words that he had said when he was looking at the ancient battlefield of the three kingdoms in the 5 Zhang Plains. Even the most perfect and meticulous plan can fall short of success because of a small mistake or accident. But even a plan full of loopholes, if luck is good enough, it may not necessarily be impossible to succeed. What you need to consider now is not the final success of the matter, but whether or not you want to participate. Yang Fan sat down opposite Taiping. He sat on the seat that Li Dan had just sat on. The cushion under his buttocks seemed to still be warm. Princess Taiping said word by word, "I have already decided to participate. What I have decided will not be changed." Chapter 1085. Yang Fan smiled and said, "Then we only need to seriously consider how to handle this matter. Why should we care about the final result? There's nothing in this world that is absolutely safe." Although his smile was serene, the lines at the corners of his eyes were somewhat stiff. He was very clear about the consequences of carrying out a military remonstrance. He understood what failure would mean, although he also knew that at this point in time he could only resort to force, and since a long time ago, when he controlled the 1,000 horsemen, he had been prepared for such a day, he still could not help but be nervous. Princess Taiping's clear eyes were like pools of spring water. She deeply gazed at him and said in a low voice, "Will you help me?" Yang Fan said, "From the very beginning, haven't we been standing together? When have we ever been opponents?" The corners of Princess Taiping's lips slowly curled into a seductive and foxy smile, her eyes overflowing with a gentle and sweet smile. But her eyes only flashed, as if she had thought of something. She could not help but roll her eyes at Yang Fan and faintly said, "From the very beginning, have you really been standing together with him?" Yang Fan said, "Of course I have." Yang Fan paused and suddenly understood. He could not help but laugh and said, "Miss Lingyue, you must clearly distinguish between public and private affairs. Back then on the banks of the Luo River, I did not accept the embroidered ball you threw at me, but that does not mean that I am not willing to stand on Li Tang's side." Humph! Thinking of the grievances she had suffered in front of him, the tears she had shed, Taiping still felt that it was unfair. But she could not deny that regardless of whether or not Yang Fan accepted her personal feelings, in terms of politics, Yang Fan had always stood on Li Tang's side. But how many women could so clearly distinguish between public and private affairs? The atmosphere between the two unwittingly became warm. Their gazes lingered for a long time as they sat facing each other. Finally, Yang Fan said in a low voice, carrying out a military remonstrance and killing Zhang Erzhang, "If it fails, the consequences need not be said. If it succeeds, will the country be able to settle down? Have you ever thought about it?" Princess Taiping slightly raised her eyebrows. She did not quite understand his words, but she only needed to think about it for a moment before she understood Yang Fan's meaning. Yang Fan's words were actually rather vague because what he really wanted to ask was how to deal with Wu Zetian. But Wu Zetian was Taiping's mother, so he naturally could not ask too clearly. But he had to ask, If these princes, princesses, and nephews carried out a military remonstrance and killed Zhang Zhang and still allowed Zetian to hold a great power, Yang Fan would stupidly wait for the emperor's death before he handed over the reins to the throne. Yang Fan, and would not participate in this. He would not to let them. No one would be able to break into the imperial palace through his black tortoise gate. Yang Fan's concerns were not baseless. No matter which faction Zhang Jianji connected to, in the end, was connected to Wu Zetian. The crown prince, the Prince of Xiang and Taiping, were Wu Zetian's own children, while the Wu clan was Wu Zetian's paternal family. Out of filial piety, the crown prince, the Prince of Xiang and Princess Taiping could not do anything too excessive to Wu Zetian, even if the military remonstrance was successful. Although Wu Zetian had not shown the slightest mercy to the Li Tang clan, the great mountain of filial piety was not something that Wu Zetian's children and juniors dared to touch. The Wu clan's current status was entirely dependent on Wu Zetian. Although they wanted to kill the second Zhang, they were even less willing to exterminate Wu Zetian. Yang Fan did not dare to show the slightest contempt for this old woman, Wu Zetian. Even though she was already too old, like a fierce tiger on the verge of death, as long as she was given the slightest chance to catch her breath, she could still bite to death prey much smaller than her. And in the territory of the great Zhou, where could there be a colossus that could stand shoulder to shoulder with her? If Yang Fan did not understand the true intentions of these princes, princesses, and nephews and recklessly followed them, even if their bones were broken and their tendons were still connected, the first to suffer would definitely be these shrimp soldiers and crab generals waving flags and shouting war cries. And when the time came, not even Princess Taiping would be able to protect him. Princess Taiping understood Yang Fan's meaning. She also knew that this point could not be ambiguous. If she could not dispel this concern of Yang Fan, even if there was an affair between the two, Yang Fan would not put his entire family to accompany her to the military remonstrance. She pondered for a moment and slowly said, "Killing the second Zhang and purging the side of the emperor is in line with the righteousness, but this is the only way. The Son of Heaven is my mother. I cannot do anything unfavorable to her." Yang Fan's eyes turned cold, but Princess Taiping followed up with another sentence. "After killing the second Zhang, you can quote the story of the Xuanwu school in the time of Taizong. Do you think this is appropriate?" Hearing this, Yang Fan's eyes suddenly brightened again. He was very satisfied with this answer. Princess Taiping's answer was actually quite vague. It was an indirect hint, not a direct statement. After all, what she talked about was how to deal with her mother, and as a daughter, it was not appropriate for her to say it too directly. But when she talked about the story of the Xuanwu school, she was also vague and refused to say it clearly because she was the direct descendant of Li Shimin, and Li Shimin did not do it properly. He could use the supreme monarch's power to change the history books so that people thousands of years later could not distinguish right from wrong. But he could not hide it from these people who had only lived for a few decades. Princess Taiping was a taboo, so she had to be vague. At that time, the whole world knew that Li Shimin coveted the position of crown prince, but Li Yuan was determined to choose the eldest son, and his attitude had never changed. Li Shimin refused to give up. Seeing that he had achieved great power, Prince of Qi Li Yuanji wanted to kill Li Shimin when Li Shimin went to his mansion to save the position of the eldest brother, but was strongly stopped by Li Jianqing. Later, Wei Zheng, a subordinate of the Eastern Palace, also tried to persuade Li Jianqing to kill Li Shimin and offered him many plans, but was rejected by Li Jianqing. Perhaps Li Jianqing did this because he was kind or because he was already the crown prince and did not want to be the bad guy. Anyway, he was not willing to make a decision, and the result was that he was harmed by Li Shimin. After Li Shimin killed Li Jianqing and Li Yuanji at the Xuanwu school, he immediately led his troops to the palace. He did not show up, but sent Yu Qigong to see the emperor. He played the bad guy and used both carrot and stick to force Li Yuan to admit the reality and hand over the power. After Li Yuan reluctantly agreed, Yu Qigong personally appeared, knelt on the ground, and cried, begging his father for forgiveness. Speaking of Yu Qigong, he was not the uncouth man in the historical novel. He was brave and resourceful. He was the one who persuaded Li Shimin to start the rebellion at Xuanwu School. He was also the one who killed Prince of Qi Li Yuanji and threatened Li Yuan to hand over the power. He was the real planner and executor of the rebellion at Xuanwu School. As for Qin Xiong and Chang Yaojin, they were only one of the participants. After Li Shimin killed the crown prince and Prince of Qi, he put his father, Li Yuan, under house arrest. However, Li Yuan was still the ruler of the country in name. After some time, he finally abdicated the throne. He did this to avoid the bad reputation of usurping the throne and to create an image of a father and son, which was justifiable. Princess Taiping's reply to Yang Fan clearly meant that after the military remonstrance, she would imitate her grandfather Li Shimin's methods and exercise de facto control over her mother. After a period of time, she would abdicate the throne. This would ensure that the military remonstrance would be effective and it would not be accused of usurping the throne. Yang Fan knew how much influence Taiping had over her two brothers. Since she had said this, she would definitely be able to convince the crown prince and Prince of Xiang. In this way, they could avoid the possibility of Wu Zetian counterattacking after the military remonstrance. However, there was still one person that they could not avoid, King Liang. Military authority was still in the hands of the Wu clan. If they wanted to use the military remonstrance, they would need the cooperation of the Wu clan. Would the Wu clan agree to this? Taiping said, "I will act as a lobbyist for King Liang. The Wu clan is also deeply afraid of the second Zhang. I believe that he will agree to use the military remonstrance." Yang Fan said, "But King Liang will only agree to execute the second Zhang. He will not agree to do anything detrimental to the Son of Heaven." Taiping said, "The Son of Heaven is the mother of the crown prince, the Prince of Xiang, and me. As children, we could never do anything disgraceful to her. As for having mother hand over the reins of power, it seems that if not for the variable known as the second Zhang, mother's relinquishment of power would only be a matter of a year and a half. Wu Sanxi is well aware of this. If we bring it forward a few days, what will he be able to hold out for? The imperial throne is already out of his reach. Does he not want to mend his relationship with our Li clan?" Yang Fan thought for a moment, then nodded. Do your best on this matter. Only with the Wu clan's agreement can we tamper with the army. We must rope in this ally. To achieve this goal, we won't hesitate to promise them a few benefits." Taiping was deeply convinced. She nodded and said, "Should we rope in some people from the second Zhang side?" Yang Fan thought for a moment, then shook her head. "That won't do. The second Zhang's foundation is still shallow. They only have two kinds of people by their side. One is people of high status and authority, and these people are at a loss when they attach themselves to the second Zhang. The other kind is people that the second Zhang has promoted. These people have only risen to power for a short time, and some of them have not yet grasped any important power. Some of them have been placed in important positions by the second Zhang, but they have only been there for a month or two. They cannot control the important departments and are of no threat to us, nor are they of any help." Princess Taiping thought it over and had to admit that Yang Fan's words were very reasonable. Now that she was about to carry out a military remonstrance, she couldn't help but think of her grandfather's mutiny at the Black Tortoise Gate and evaluate the gains and losses from that successful mutiny. Back when Li Shimin had coveted the imperial throne, Crown Prince Li Jianqing had not been willing to use extreme measures to deal with him, but he had taken precautions. On one hand, he had suppressed the development of the Prince of Qin's residence and weakened Li Shimin's power. At the same time, like Li Shimin, he had tried to infiltrate and rope them in. However, Li Jianqing had tried to rope in Li Shimin's trusted generals, while Li Shimin had tried to rope in those lower-rank subordinates of Li Jianqing who wielded crucial power, such as General Chang, he who guarded the Black Tortoise Gate. As a result, Li Jianqing had come up empty-handed, while Li Shimin had succeeded time and time again. Why was there such a huge difference between the two? It wasn't that Li Jianqing was too arrogant and incompetent, but that their goals were different. Li Jianqing was already the crown prince, and if he could successfully rope in the generals at Li Shimin's side, he could achieve his goal without shedding a single drop of blood. But Li Shimin was not the crown prince, and Li Yuan had no intention of replacing the crown prince. He had no chance of using proper methods to ascend to the throne, unless he carried out a mutiny. What a mutiny required the most were the generals guarding the vital areas of the imperial palace. The two had different statuses and goals for roping in, so the methods they used were naturally different. Right now, the second Zhang's faction was mainly in the palace. If the crown prince, the Prince of Xiang, Princess Taiping, and King Liang joined forces, they could control the majority of the military and political forces, and then launch a mutiny. There really was no need to take the risk of roping in the people at the second Zhang side. If news of this were to leak out, the consequences would be far worse. Princess Taiping's thoughts became clear once she understood the key to colluding with the Li family and the Wu family. Chapter 1086. After Wu Sanxi sent off Princess Taiping, he stood in front of the mansion and pondered for a moment. He then called over a trusted family member and ordered, "Go to the Jinwu guards and invite the King of Hanoi to see me. I have something to discuss with him." That family hurriedly left. Wu Sanxi was just about to turn around and return to his residence. Just as he turned around, he saw Princess and Lu dressed up gorgeously. His good-for-nothing son was also blindly following behind his wife. Wu Sanxi frowned and asked unhappily, "Where are you going?" Although Princess Enel was arrogant, she did not dare to be presumptuous in front of this eunuch. When she saw him standing at the door, Princess Enel immediately stopped and obediently bowed to him. She said in a sweet voice, "Eunuch, Duke Huan Yanxiu is holding a banquet at the Chu Qi and has invited Chongshuan to attend. Daughter-in-law wants to accompany husband to the banquet." Yesterday was the birthday of Wu Sanxi's wife, so Wu Chongshuan and his wife rushed back and stayed at the Liang mansion. Although Wu Sanxi was dissatisfied with his daughter-in-law's enthusiasm for socializing, he knew that his son and daughter-in-law had other places to stay. Out of sight, out of mind. Also, he knew how obedient his son was to his daughter-in-law. Wu Sanxi originally wanted to call his eldest son to the study to discuss this important matter together. Seeing that his son was happily accompanying his wife to leave, he was too lazy to call him. This son of his really didn't live up to his expectations. But thinking about it carefully, which of his sons had accomplished something in the world? For a moment, Wu Sanxi could not help but feel disheartened. Forget it! Don't say that I have already lost the qualifications to fight for the throne. Even if I have the ability to fight for it, which of these children has the ability to protect it? This old man is already close to 70 years old and can only help them for a few more years. It is better to ensure their wealth and glory. Thinking of this, Wu Sanxi was even more determined to cooperate with Princess Taiping. Princess Taiping's sudden visit today surprised Wu Sanxi. Generally speaking, unless it was a family banquet and Wu Yuji was accompanying her, this sister-in-law would not visit. But today, not only did Princess Taiping come, but she did not have Wu Yuji by her side. Wu Sanxi was a little surprised. When Wu Sanxi invited Princess Taiping to the main hall to sit down, he asked her the purpose of her visit. Princess Taiping probed him a little bit, and then she told him the purpose of her visit, which startled Wu Sanxi. To be honest, Wu Sanxi also felt that the current situation was tricky. Wu Zetian was bedridden and had not seen her ministers for a long time. She did not trust her children and nephews at all. Instead, she treated the second Zhang as her family. Wu Sanxi was also quite worried. He did not believe that heir Zhang would dare to pretend to be the emperor. How could heir Zhang be so stupid? However, this did not mean that second Zhang would not do anything. Wu Zetian was so old and sick. It was obvious that things were not looking good for her. At this time, would the second Zhang consider his own future? Second Zhang had already become enemies with both the Wu and Li families. Would they obediently wait for Wu Zetian to take her last breath, then obediently scram back to the Zhang mansion, and wait for the Wu and Li families to settle old scores with them for Li Zhongruan, Li Xianhui and Wu Yanji? Impossible. Even if second Zhang was willing, the people at their side would not be willing. They would definitely seek to protect themselves, and if they wanted to protect themselves, there were many methods. They could fake an edict and have the Prince of Xiang, Li Dan, ascend to the throne. They had caused the deaths of Li Xian's children and the people of the Wu family. If they performed the meritorious service of ensuring that Li Dan became the emperor, Li Dan would return the favor and naturally protect their riches and honor. If they were unwilling to part with their power, they could also fake an edict and bypass Li Xian and have Li Xian's youngest son, Li Zhongfu, ascend to the throne. Li Zhongfu was only 7 years old. If they made Li Zhongfu emperor and then used the posthumous edict to appoint the two brothers as appointed ministers, they would be holding the emperor and ordering the vassals around. Would the Wu and Li families definitely obey the posthumous edict if second Zhang had Wu Zetian's posthumous edict? Of course not. The Wu and Li families could completely claim that the posthumous edict was a fake edict and refuse to accept it. But if they did this, they would have to bear the name of rebels who did not obey the edict, and it would be extremely difficult to wash away this crime. Moreover, it was very difficult to determine the position of the great general of the Featherwood Guard, Wu Yi. He had always been loyal to Wu Zetian and had always remained uninvolved in the conflict between the Wu and Li families and the conflict between the Wu and Li families and second Zhang. If he believed in Wu Zetian's posthumous edict, or if second Zhang used the military power of the world as bait to win his support, then it was hard to say whether the Wu and Li families would be able to overturn the fake edict. If second Zhang was smart enough, he could grant Yang Zixi, Su Weiwei, and the other prime ministers' positions and even promise them the title of king. He could also vigorously rope in some of the feudal officials who held important military power. In the palace, he also had Wu Yi to support him. After first establishing the young emperor and then using the Son of Heaven to order the vassals around, it was not impossible for Wu and Li to achieve greatness in the future. During this process, what would Wu Sanxi do? It was true that he also had the possibility of being roped in, but what could second Zhang use to rope him in? He was already an extremely high official and could not be promoted any further. Second Zhang could not possibly give him any more power. If he did, then second Zhang would just be making a wedding dress for him. Therefore, as the head of the Wu family, he had to seriously plan for himself, his descendants, and the Wu family from a long-term perspective. The result of his choice was to ally with the Li family. He and Li Xian were relatives by marriage, and Li Xian had always been mediocre and incompetent. If he also had the merit of establishing a new emperor, he would not be affected. As for his aunt, he also took Princess Taiping's words to heart. Princess Taiping bluntly told him that after the military remonstrance was carried out, it would urge the empress to hand over her power. Although Wu Sanxi was very dependent on his aunt, he also knew that his aunt would not be able to hold on for much longer. He would have to face this matter sooner or later. Then he might as well kill second Zhang. According to the arrangement that his aunt had been working on for the past few years, the Wu and Li families would jointly rule the world. No matter who tried to change this arrangement, they must be eradicated, regardless of whether this person was second Zhang or Wu Zetian herself who had created this situation. The alliance of Wu and Li to overthrow Zhang was officially formed from this moment on. In the deep night, Yang Fan slowly walked to the west mountain wall of the study, followed by Xiao Man and Anu. Anu was carrying a lantern. The snow glowed, so the ground was relatively bright, and the lantern was not conspicuous. Under the mountain wall was a wall carving of 5 bulls, and in front of the wall carving was a water jar. The water jar was originally planted with water lilies, but since it was winter, only milky white ice could be seen spilling out of the jar. Yang Fan reached out and hugged the big jar, and with a hard turn to the left, the big jar began to rotate and the surrounding snow was flipped up. Yang Fan forcefully rotated the big jar 3 times and then walked to the wall carving. He grabbed the protruding stone horn of a bull in the middle and pulled it forward. The stone wall rumbled, and a hole appeared in the middle with a creaking sound. Yang Fan looked back and asked, "Did you two see it clearly?" Xiao Man and Anu nodded lightly, and Yang Fan took the lantern from Anu and walked in first. The stone passageway extended all the way into the rockery. Yang Fan's voice was a little hollow in the grotto. "Do you see this handle? After you come in, as long as you pull here, the entrance will be sealed. If the people outside want to dig it out, it will not be a matter of time. Go straight from here. There are a total of 3 paths. The one on the left leads straight to a lake more than 2 miles away, and the exit is in a family's well. The one on the right leads to the side and back of our house, and the exit is in the vegetable field of a house outside the back wall of Princess Annel's mansion. The one in the middle leads to Madame Zheng's house, and it is usually closed, so you don't have to worry about it." Yang Fan's introduction was very detailed. Xiao Man and Anu looked at each other, and there was a faint trace of worry between their beautiful brows. How could they not be worried when their husband suddenly called them over and took them to walk along the secret passageway of their home, and introduced it so seriously? They knew that there was a secret passageway in their house, but they had never walked through it or understood it. Today was the first time they had entered the secret passageway with Yang Fan accompanying them. Yang Fan said, "This secret passageway was carefully designed by the skilled craftsmen of Xianzong, and the designers were each responsible for a section. The same was true for the people who built it, so only the 3 of us know the details of the entire secret passageway. As to the secret room that Huang Yuanbao helped us build, that was just a pretense, and I never thought to use it. After all, he had built palaces for the imperial family." Yang Fan slowly walked at the front with the lantern, and his voice was very clear. "If you need to use this secret passageway, the situation will be very dangerous. You can lead your entire family to hide here. You can choose left, you can choose right, and you can also leave from one of the 2 exits. The people at the exit are all people I have arranged. As long as you go out from here, they will know what to do. The people at the exit on the left can arrange for you to go to the western region or the southern frontier, and the people at the exit on the right can arrange for you to go to Fusang or the South Sea. As to where to send you, it will depend on the specific situation at the time." Xiao Man said with a trembling voice, "Lang Jun, what happened?" Yang Fan turned around and smiled at her. "Don't worry, nothing happened. Otherwise, would I have brought you here to talk about these things slowly? I would have taken you and escaped long ago. Haha, telling you this today is just in case." Xiao Man did not let go of her doubts and persistently asked, "Lang Jun, you and I have been husband and wife for a long time. Do you think I don't know your personality? Don't hide it from me. What happened? What do you want me to be on guard against?" Anu did not speak, but gently held Yang Fan's hand. Her little hand was cold. Yang Fan secretly sighed. He also knew that with the shrewdness of these 2 women, it would not be easy to deceive them. Now that he had given them an explanation, he was afraid that they would not give up if he did not tell them the truth. But after telling them everything, would they not be worried? Yang Fan didn't want to give up. He deliberately said in a relaxed tone, "I do have something important to do now, but it won't be too dangerous. Do you think I don't know the principle of a noble sun sitting under the eaves? Haha, if you really want to talk about risks, everything has risks. Walking on the road, you will encounter a frightened horse. Sitting at home will collapse the beam. I always think about failure before thinking about victory, that's why." "Lang Jun." Xiao Man rudely interrupted him. She raised her eyebrows and gradually showed her heroic spirit. "Li Tang's princess and Wu Zhou's marquis. Lang Jun has never cared about them. In the Tubo kingdom, Lang Jun played tricks on Zanpu and the prime minister. In the Turkic Shui Yentua city, Lang Jun dealt with the 100,000 troops with ease. This time, who is it that made you so cautious? Yang Fan was silent for a long time and softly replied, "The Empress." Chapter 1087. Another year was coming to an end. As the end of the year approached, people from the palace came in and out more frequently. The eunuchs who prepared for the new year, the craftsmen who decorated the tents, and the musicians of the musical house who rehearsed large-scale palace dances and various celebrations. Because of this, the palace was much more relaxed than usual. But on the first day of the little new year, something unpleasant happened in the palace. A little eunuch suddenly ran to report to Shanghai Wanner that someone had taken items from the palace out to sell. After hearing the news, Shanghai Wanner immediately dispatched a team from the inner guards, led by her trusted eunuchs, to strictly interrogate each palace gate. As a result, they found some silk, incense burners, masks, books, and other objects from the palace maids and eunuchs who didn't have time to escape. In fact, these things weren't too valuable, and they didn't dare to steal and sell the truly valuable things. But taking some things from the palace and using the opportunity to leave the palace to sell them was a violation of the rules. Shanghai Wanner was furious, but she didn't report this matter to the emperor. Firstly, there was no need to report petty theft to the emperor. Secondly, the emperor had been bedridden in recent months. Not only did he not attend court for many days, but he was also unable to attend several major New Year's celebrations. Naturally, it was impossible to disturb him with such a small matter. Therefore, Shanghai Wanner reported this matter to the great general of the Yulin Guard, Wu Yi, urging him to strengthen the management. This was because the Yulin Guard was responsible for guarding the palace. The Black Tortoise Gate was nominally under the Yulin Guard, but in reality it was directly under the emperor's command. The other palace gates were under the direct control of the Yulin Guard. Normally, the Yulin Guard had to search the eunuchs and palace maids entering and leaving the palace. But after so many years, this aspect hadn't been too strict. Perhaps some Yulin Guard soldiers had received benefits from them and deliberately indulged them. Therefore, they couldn't absolve themselves from the blame for the eunuchs and palace maids being taken out of the palace. Wu Yi was very upset and could only order his men to strengthen the inspection. He didn't care too much about such a small matter. Immediately after, on the next day, when the palace minister Ji Su was inspecting the various chambers of the palace, he unexpectedly discovered that several Yulin Guard officers and men had secretly drunk wine. After drinking, they went on duty and guarded the palace. Ji Su was greatly dissatisfied. Although these people repeatedly begged for mercy, Ji Su still rudely told this matter to Wu Yi with an iron face. On the 20th day of the 12th lunar month, Taichung Temple was rehearsing the Nuo opera in the palace. They selected 120 eunuchs to play the roles of Huazi and also selected several hundred burly officers and soldiers from the Jinwu Guards to play the roles of various immortals and demons. After the rehearsal of the exorcism of the Nuo opera, a fire inexplicably broke out at the rehearsal site. The fire was not big and was quickly put out. However, after an investigation, it was found that the fire had not been completely extinguished when they dispersed. The Yellow Gate and the Golden Guards who had participated in the fire had all been punished, but the fire had only reignited after they had left for nearly 2 hours. Naturally, the Featherwood Guard, who were in charge of patrolling, could not escape responsibility. As a result, Zhou Yong, Zhang Tinggui, and several other imperial censors who had heard of this matter submitted a severely worded memorial, listing the various misdeeds of the Featherwood Guard's mismanagement and requesting the imperial court to investigate and rectify. Now that Wu Zetian had not attended court for a long time due to illness, she would not personally handle matters other than extremely important matters. This memorial fell into the hands of Zhang Zhenji, who had just become a prime minister. In fact, in terms of seniority, Zhang Zhenji, who had just become a prime minister, did not have the qualifications to handle matters before Yang Zixi, Su Wei, and the other old prime ministers. However, those prime ministers were people who were afraid of shouldering responsibilities. This memorial involved the king of Jian and the great general of the Featherwood Guard, Wu Yi. They did not want to offend these people, so after pushing the blame around, this memorial naturally fell into Zhang Jinji's hands. Zhang Jinji was really a new official who made 3 changes. He attached great importance to this memorial and immediately summoned Wu Yi to reprimand him in a stern voice. The next day, he removed several Featherwood Guard generals who were directly or indirectly responsible and transferred several young and promising officials into the Featherwood Guard to take up posts. The people Zhang Jinji arranged included Minister of the Right Jing Hui of Zhongtai, Vice Minister of Punishment Huan Yanfan, Attendant of the Right Free Cavalry Li Zhan, Minister of Dismissal Wang Tongjiao, Minister of Secretary Xue Sixing, and Minister of Remonstrance Yang Yuanyan. These people were all civil officials. Fortunately, it was extremely normal for civil and military officials to exchange roles in the Tang dynasty. Yang Fan had first Empress Wu civil and then joined the military, so it was not strange for Zhang Jinji to make such arrangements. These people were arranged by Zhang Jinji into the Featherwood Guard, each assuming the position of general. Originally, the sudden removal and appointment of so many mid-level generals of the Featherwood Guard was bound to arouse the vigilance of the Wu family, who held military power. As long as Wu Sanxi stepped forward to interfere, Zhang Jinji's large-scale personnel transfer would absolutely be difficult to succeed. However, Wu Sanxi unexpectedly maintained his silence. Because Wu Yi was not strict with his subordinates, causing his subordinates to repeatedly make mistakes, he was already somewhat lacking in confidence. Moreover, he was unable to obtain the support of his many relatives in the family who held military power. Therefore, he let Zhang Jinji's adjustments go unhindered. The military remonstrance planned by the Wu and Li families had smoothly carried out the first step. After these people each assumed the position of Featherwood Guard General, they immediately introduced a few trusted family generals into the army. It was impossible for them to carry out a large-scale change of blood in the Featherwood Guard, but introducing a few personal guards to act as personal soldiers was a very normal matter. When Yang Fan had established the 1,000 cavalry, he had also arranged for Renwei and other trusted bodyguards who had never been in the army into the army. As these mid-level generals were intensely preparing for the military remonstrance, changes were also quietly occurring in the palace under one or his arrangements. These changes were under the 2 Zhang's eyes, but the 2 of them were completely unaware. In terms of the foundation of the palace, how could they compare to Shangguan Wan, who had been operating for 20 years? On Yang Fan's side, he was also quietly making preparations. Yang Fan found Ma Qiao and had a secret discussion with him. The next day, Ma Qiao fell ill. For many days in a row, he asked for leave and stayed at home. Originally, the Black Tortoise Gate was guarded by 5 Lang generals in rotation, but Ma Qiao fell ill. Someone had to replace him for the day he was on duty. Ma Qiao found Lu Maofeng for this. Lu Maofeng gladly agreed. During the days that Ma Qiao was sick and stayed at home, he would replace Ma Qiao on duty. Of course, these days of leave would need to be returned. Then, when necessary, as long as Ma Qiao recovered, he could replace Lu Maofeng on duty. This would prevent Lu Maofeng from appearing at the Black Tortoise Gate for a very long time. Yang Fan made these preparations after full consideration. He had 5 Lang generals under him. Among them, Huang Xuchang, Chu Kuanga, Ma Qiao, and Duge Huizhi were all under his control. Only Lu Maofeng had originally been recommended by the 2 Zhangs. Yang Fan had no choice but to be careful around him. In reality, in the years that Lu Maofeng had been in the 1,000 cavalry, he had a very good relationship with the brothers of the 1,000 cavalry. He was also loyal to Yang Fan, but this matter was too important. It was a desperate gamble with his head tied to his belt. If he failed, the best result would be to flee for his life. Yang Fan did not dare to take the risk. If Lu Maofeng was still loyal to the 2 Zhangs, even if it was only to repay the 2 Zhangs' kindness and imitate Guan Yunchang's righteous release of Huarong Dao, It would be a heavy burden that Yang Fan could not bear. He did not dare to take this risk. Moreover, he would use some means to make Lu Maofeng avoid it, so that it would not make things difficult for Lu Maofeng. Of course, if Lu Maofeng happened to be on duty on the day of the military remonstrance, Yang Fan could also arrange a few trusted aides to first control him when the remonstrance was launched. But in that case, the friendship between the two of them over the years would disappear. It would be difficult to mend the rift afterwards. It would be better to use some tactful means to make him avoid it. These days, the two Zhang had been guarding by Wu Zetian's side. After asking the imperial doctors and learning that Wu Zetian's condition was not good, they moved Wu Zetian to the Yingzhan Palace overnight. They transferred their trusted aides and took control of the entire Yingzhan Palace. If the prime ministers wanted to see the emperor, they had to get their permission. Even the Minister of Internal Affairs, Shanghai Wan did not have the opportunity to see Wu Zetian without their permission. These days, the crown prince pretended to be a filial son every day. He ran to the north gate and waiting for his seriously ill mother to summon him to enter the palace to serve. Unfortunately, he could only wait outside the north gate. He could not even see the cornice of his mother's bedroom. The two Zhang's actions were only an instinctive reaction because they felt confused about their future. As for what they should do next, they had no clue. These days, the two Zhang gathered a group of trusted aides and discussed the problem of their way out after Wu Zetian passed away. There was only a curtain separating them. Behind the curtain was the seriously ill and unconscious Wu Zetian. Outside the curtain were the two lovers she relied on as emotional pillars in her later years. These two lovers were calmly discussing how to preserve their wealth and glory after her death. The two Zhang's true diehard subordinates were all a group of high-handed but low-minded, hedonistic young masters. Faced with this kind of military and national affairs, what could they do? Even Zhang Yizhi was only slightly steadier than Zhang Changzong. Faced with this kind of national affairs, he also had the feeling of a dog biting a hedgehog and not knowing where to start. So after many days of discussion, all they came up with were some whimsical ideas. At this time, the news that Zhang Jinji had made adjustments to the middle-level generals of the Yulin Guard reached their ears. Although they felt that they were in the dark under the lamp, Zhang Jinji's actions aroused their vigilance. The two Zhang became even more uneasy. They immediately summoned a group of beautiful young think tanks of Fengchen prison to discuss countermeasures. As the chief think tank under the two Zhang, the tall and handsome Fan Liyuan said aggressively, "Zhang Jinji's move must be aimed at us. Feng Chenling, they have already raised the butchers knife high. We must respond immediately." Zhang Changzong said blankly, "These days, we have been discussing how to respond, but we haven't come up with a clue. Why don't you say, how should we respond?" Fan Liyuan said, "Minister Fengchen, you are the Yunhui general, the left ox commander of the 1,000 guards. You have tens of thousands of troops and horses under your command. And Feng Chenling is the junior minister of defense, in charge of the 3 departments of the armory, weapons, and palace guarding. The saint gave you these 2 positions. Isn't it to guard against the unexpected? In for a penny, in for a pound, in for a pound. You will order the transfer of the 1,000 guards into the palace. Feng Chenling will open the armory and distribute the armors, bows, and other sharp weapons, and clean up the original guards in the palace. The 1,000 guards will be on duty in the palace and firmly control the entire palace. With the heavy palace walls as a barrier, no one will be able to break in." Zhang Yizhi's expression changed. "What are you doing? Do you want a rebel?" Chapter 1088. Hearing Fan Liyuan's words, Zhang Changzong replied guiltily, "This ever since I became the commander of the 1,000 ox guard. I have only been to the army a few times because I have to serve the sage. I don't know if the soldiers will listen to my orders. Moreover, I am only a commander of the 1,000 ox guard. There is no war outside, and I have no right to mobilize the army." Fan Liyuan said, "This is easy. Isn't the imperial seal currently in the hands of Fengchen? As long as Fengchen drafts an imperial edict and mobilizes the army in the name of the Son of Heaven, who would dare to disobey? Zhang Yiji could no longer hold back and asked sternly, "Then what should we do after we mobilize the army to control the palace? Do you think we can still rebel?" Fan Liyuan said, "We naturally don't have the power to rebel. We might as well fake an edict from the Son of Heaven and kill Zhang Jinji and the others. We should be able to do that, right?" Zhang Yiji said, "Zhang Jinji has the current crown prince behind him. Do you think that killing Zhang Jinji will solve our current predicament?" Fan Liyuan said fiercely, "Then kill the crown prince as well." Zhang Yiji said coldly, "Kill the crown prince? Do you think that the Prince of Xiang and Prince Liang will just stand by and watch?" Fan Liyuan used his palm like a knife and slashed downwards. With a savage expression, he said, "Then we'll go all the way. We'll kill the crown prince, Prince Liang, Prince Yang, and Princess Taiping. When the time comes, we'll be like a group of dragons without a leader. Won't they be at our mercy?" Fan Liyuan's words stunned his young companions. "This kid has gone crazy." Fan Liyuan looked at their shocked expressions and said, "What? Are you afraid? This is something that a young minister wanted to do, and he really did it. Now that we have the emperor in our hands, as long as we control the palace and issue an imperial edict, what can't we do?" Zhang Yiji shook his head. "Do you think that they will wash their necks and sit at home waiting for us to kill them? Will they not guard against us? Do you think you can kill them just because you want to? Do you know what it means to fail? Wishful thinking. Truly wishful thinking. Slow down, slow down. Brother Fan's idea might work." Chao Sheng, who was also a member of the Fengchen prison, suddenly said with shining eyes, "It is impossible to kill all the princes. When the time comes, all their sons and nephews will rebel. We will not be able to suppress them with just the 1,000 ox guards. But what if we pull one faction to fight against the other?" Chao Sheng surveyed the crowd and said, "The Prince of Xiang and Prince Liang are both people who no longer have any fate with the imperial throne. If we can rope in one of them and use it, promise to make him emperor." Zhang Yiji closed his eyes and slowly said, "Don't forget, we killed the Wu and Li clansmen." Chao Sheng said, "So what? With benefits in front of them, how could they not let go of this hatred? Moreover, the dead were the children of the crown prince and the son of the king of Wei, not the biological children of the Prince of Xiang and the Prince of Liang. As long as we control the palace and the emperor, we can negotiate with the Prince of Xiang or Prince Liang, using the throne as bait. We won't have to worry about them not obediently submitting." The crowd looked at each other in dismay. Although Chao Sheng's idea was bold, it was not without reason. Following his train of thought, Zhang Yiji said, "The Wu clan is out of the question. The people of the Wu clan control most of the military power in the capital, and the Wu clan has many sons and nephews, all of them in high positions. They have no need for us, as long as we support Wu Sanxi to the throne. Once he puts on the imperial robe, he can immediately kick us aside." Zhang Changzong excitedly said, "Then let's go find the Prince of Xiang. What do you think?" Zhang Yiji stood up and slowly paced around the hall. He hesitantly said, "Prince Liang has military power, the crown prince has righteousness, and although the ministers of the court have their own supporters, ever since Di Renja died, the power of the Prince of Xiang's faction has been greatly reduced. Moreover, after the position of crown prince was confirmed, the Prince of Xiang intentionally reduced his interactions with the ministers to avoid suspicion. Of all the factions in the court, the Prince of Xiang's faction is the weakest. Even Princess Taiping is stronger than him. Do we support him? Even if he's willing to agree, it's still too risky. If we had the ability to eliminate the crown prince and Prince Liang and support the Prince of Xiang to the throne, would we be in such an awkward situation?" These words silenced the crowd. It was true that the plan was good, but in the end, they did not have the strength to do so. The emperor was not someone they could elect just because they wanted to. If they tried to recruit the Prince of Xiang, even if the Prince of Xiang coveted the throne. He would not believe in their abilities. Perhaps he would even sell them out to win the trust of the Crown Prince. For a moment, the discussion of the youths reached a dead end. At this moment, a light cough came from behind the curtain. A palace maid cried out in alarm, "The saint has awakened! The saint has awakened!" Zhang Yizhi hurriedly raised his hand to stop the crowd from speaking. He lowered his voice and said, "We will discuss this matter later. All of you withdraw." After saying this, he purposely messed up his hair, making it seem as if he was extremely haggard from serving the emperor without care for his clothes. He jogged into the curtain. In the winter of the River Chu, the southern slope was covered in snow, and the chill was biting. Standing on the Furong Tower on this clear day, one could see the snow and floating clouds on Mount Zhongnan in the distance. Yang Fan pushed open the window. He did not look at Mount Zhongnan, but at the city in the north that was as orderly as a chessboard. Mount Zhongnan was a place of seclusion. He was currently actively trying to enter the world. The stove was blazing. Shin Mu did not have a body as strong as Yang Fan's. He found it hard to endure such a cold day. When Yang Fan opened the window, the cold wind blew in. Shin Mu, who was sitting in front of the stove, shivered. He quickly picked up a fur coat and wrapped it around his body. Only then did he walk over to Yang Fan's side. Yang Fan did not turn his head. He only faced the wind and rain, gazing at the majestic scene of the distant palace. He sighed with emotion. Who would have thought that under this peace a great change was about to take place? If we can successfully mutiny this time, perhaps our Tang dynasty will be able to reappear as a mighty country. Shen Mu tightened the collar of his fur coat and closed his mouth. After he got used to the cold air that rushed into his nose, he then said, "Does the Xian sect plan to be at the forefront this time?" Yang Fan shook his head and said, "I have thought about it carefully. If I want a moment of riches, then I will do it. If I want a long-term riches, then I should hold back a little in everything and not show off my abilities." He did not finish his words. His gaze landed on a tall tree in the Furong garden. Because of the heavy snow, the old tree trunk had cracked and was shaking in the wind and snow. Shinmu smiled and revealed a trace of joy. "Once the new year is over, I will leave." Although the Xian sect and the hidden sect had always cooperated well, this time, the hidden sect did not plan to get involved. Not only was Shenmu leaving, but many important figures of the hidden sect were leaving Chang, and before the coup. Once the coup that the Xian sect participated in failed, according to the agreement between Yang Fan and Shenmu, the Xian sect and the hidden sect would exchange identities. The light would be in the dark, and the dark would be in the light. At that time, Yang Fan would lead the Xian sect to hide behind the scenes and become the hidden sect. Shin Mu would lead the hidden sect to make contact with the victors of the coup and become the Xian sect. Seeing Shen Mu shiver again, Yang Fan smiled and closed the window. Shin Mu let out a breath and returned to the stove to remove his fur coat. Yang Fan also walked back and sat down by the stove. He poured a cup of hot wine. Shin Mu said, "Before you leave, I have to remind you to be careful of the Wu clan taking advantage of the situation." Yang Fan smiled peacefully and said, "We do not have to worry about this. Zhang Jianji has already thought of this. In the southern border, I have interacted with that old fellow. This person is astute and has deep schemes. How could he not think of this? Not only is he guarded against the Wu clan, but he also does not have absolute trust in me." Shen Mu couldn't help but laugh and said, "Who asked you to be so close to the Wu clan? If I am Zhang Jinji and the fate of the nation and clan is at stake, I would not dare to let my guard down against you." What is he going to do?" Yang Fan said, "The ones who planned and presided over the military remonstrance were the ministers in the imperial court. They were the main force of the rebellion. The crown prince was the banner that rallied the people and used his righteous name to gather the people's hearts. After the military remonstrance was successful, he took charge of the overall situation. In the last few Turkic invasions, The emperor has always appointed the Prince of Xiang as commander and the Prime Minister as deputy commander. Although the one truly in charge of the army is the deputy commander, the Prince of Xiang is still nominally the highest commander. Even now, the Prince of Xiang has not been relieved of his duties. He is currently the highest commander of the soldiers of the Southern Guard. Shenmu emphasized, only nominally. Yang Fan said, being the supreme commander in name is also a righteous name. If the emperor has already lost control of the political power and the Wu clan, which controls most of the military power, recognizes his status, then he can command the soldiers and horses of the 9 cities and maintain the stability of the capital during the military remonstrance. Shenmu narrowed his eyes in thought, then nodded and said, continue. Yang Fan said, Princess Taiping is a woman, so her movements will not attract much attention. Thus, during this time, she will be in charge of the liaison and will travel everywhere as the liaison between the Crown Prince, the Prince of Xiang, and Prince Liang. Shenmu nodded and said, the military power of the capital is divided into the Northern and Southern Guards. The Southern Guards should have been under the command of the Prime Ministers. Now that there are 2 Prime Ministers, Zhang Jianji and Cui Xianhui, and the Prince of Xiang, the supreme commander in name of the Southern Guards, and the Wu clan does not interfere, the Southern Guards should be under our control. Then what about the Northern Guards? Yang Fan said, the Northern Guards are a little more complicated. Most of the soldiers and horses of the Northern Guards are in the hands of the Wu clan, stationed outside the Black Tortoise Gate on the north side of the palace. Wu Sanxi and Wu Yizhong can control most of these soldiers and horses. The Featherwood Guard is directly guarding the palace, and it is not under the control of Wu Sanxi and Wu Yizhong. The Featherwood Guard is divided into 3 forces. Shenmu smiled and said, your 1,000 cavalry is an independent force. Yang Fan nodded and said correct. The great generals of the left and right Featherwood Guard can usually order me around, but in reality, I am directly under the Son of Heaven and can completely refuse their military movements and orders. Then the next 2 forces are the left and right Featherwood Guard. The great general of the left Featherwood Guard is Wu Yui. The left and right Featherwood Guards are respected. He controls the entire Featherwood Guard, but in reality, he can only directly mobilize the left Featherwood Guard. Li Duozhua has controlled the Imperial Army and the Northern Guards for more than 20 years. The right Featherwood Guard is completely under his control. Usually, he obeys Wu Yui's orders, but if he disobeys at a critical moment, Wu Yui cannot do anything to him. Shenmu gently raised his cup and said, mutual checks and balances, layer upon layer of restraint. The Empress has good methods. Yang Fan said, unfortunately, the methods are too complicated and sometimes fatal. Shenmu took a sip of wine and leisurely said, correct. If my guess is correct, this great General Li Duozhua has also been instigated by Zhang Jinji? Yang Fan nodded and said, correct. Between the second Zhang and the Wu and Li families. It doesn't need to be asked which choice he will make. Shenmu focused his eyes and pondered for a moment, then suddenly said, no wonder Zhang Jinji is using and guarding against the Wu family, and Wu Sanxi is also willing to cooperate. So the key lies here. Yang Fan nodded and said, when the time comes, Zhang Jinji will mobilize the trusted generals he has placed in the Featherwood Guard. They will lead their trusted aides to meet at the Black Tortoise Gate. I will open the Black Tortoise Gate to let them in, and then close it to prevent Wu Sanxi from following behind. I will arrange for my subordinates to guard the Black Tortoise Gate, while I myself will move with them. Shenmu smiled and said, this is using you as a hostage, but as long as you have no disloyalty, you will definitely agree to their arrangement. The merit of following the dragon also varies, since everyone is risking their lives. Who wouldn't want to show their face in front of the Crown Prince? The Prince of Xiang will command the Southern Imperial Army to control the 9 cities, and the Northern Imperial Army will be commanded by Wu Sanxi to suppress the army. In that case, the biggest variable will be the left Featherwood Guard, and they will be restrained by the right featherwood guard. In this case, it is indeed foolproof." Yang Fan laughed and said, "I don't know if it's because I'm getting older and have experienced more things, but I don't believe in being infallible anymore." Gue Guzi says, "It is not difficult to plan thoroughly. It is not difficult to speak. It is not difficult to listen. It is not difficult to accomplish." However, with this arrangement, the success rate of the military remonstrance will indeed increase greatly. In fact, in the entire military remonstrance plan, there are more than what I have told you. There are some defensive measures that even I am not aware of. What I can confirm is that the success rate of this military remonstrance is at least 70%, unless the secret is leaked in advance or a major accident occurs. Shinmu said, "For the benefits of our succession hall, we must make use of this mutiny to strive for the greatest benefits." Yang Fan replied calmly, "Of course, this is for sure." Shinmu smiled and said, "From the looks of it, our hidden sect will have to continue lying in wait. I toast you with this cup of wine. I wish you immediate success." Chapter 1089. The New Year had arrived. This year, Wu Zetian, who liked to change her era name, had already decided on a new era name, Dragon God. This era name was thought up and decided by Wu Zetian on her sickbed. Wu Zetian had always believed that changing her name could change her fate. Perhaps she hoped that this new era name would improve her health, so that she could still soar like a dragon and soar above the 9 heavens. However, her health did not improve. After the imperial physician treated her, he firmly opposed her participation in the series of New Year's celebrations. After Zhang fully understood the situation from the imperial physician, he had no choice but to join the ranks of persuasion. The stubborn Wu Zetian could only give in to her 2 little lovers and give up the opportunity to participate in the New Year's celebrations. While Wu Zetian was still conscious, Zhang, who had not come up with a good plan, tried to ask Wu Zetian for a plan and express their deep concern. However, Wu Zetian did not care. She firmly believed that her health would recover. She did not think that she was beyond cure. At the same time, Wu Zetian was very confident in the future structure of the Wu family controlling the military and the Li family controlling the politics of the Wu Zhou Empire. She did not believe that the Wu family and the Li family would unite against her. As long as the Wu family and the Li family did not unite, the political system she designed would be absolutely stable. The Wu family and the Li family would keep each other in check. Who would dare to harm Zhang? However, things are hard to predict, and people's hearts are hard to predict. Her careful arrangements and precautions, along with her old age and her excessive indulgence of Zhang, have become full of loopholes, unable to withstand a single blow. The Wu and Li families that seemed impossible to unite because of Zhang's sudden appearance have broken the balance between them. They have already joined hands to plot against her, the Supreme Emperor. Due to her health, Wu Zetian cancelled or did not participate in a large number of celebrations. However, she did not want to cancel the ceremony of the officials paying respects to the emperor on the first day of the new year. She did not want to avoid attending. She knew that after not attending court for so long, the officials' hearts were already wavering. If she did not even attend such an important ceremony, her control over the court would further shrink. However, with her current physical condition, even if she just sat on the throne and didn't say a word, it would still be difficult for her to continue paying her respects for an entire day. Thus, Wu Zetian thought about it again and again, and changed the requirement for all the civil and military officials in the capital, as well as the members of the imperial family, as well as those who had performed meritorious deeds, to those who were at least of the 5th rank. Then, she changed it to those who were of the 3rd rank. Even so, she didn't last until the officials finished paying their respects. She was forced to return to the palace to rest, sweating profusely. As a result, her accepting hundreds of officials to pay their respects did not achieve any effect at all. Instead, it had the opposite effect. The officials became more and more worried about the emperor's health. Discussing the emperor's funeral had become an open topic. Under these circumstances, Wu Zetian, who was the focus of countless people and stared at by countless eyes, did two more things. They aroused the vigilance of Zhang Genji and the others who were actively planning for a military remonstrance, prompting them to immediately launch a military remonstrance. Perhaps it was the instinctive reaction of an emperor in a critical condition, or perhaps Wu Zetian had truly discovered something. But after the 15th day of the first month, Wu Zetian suddenly issued an edict ordering the 1,000 ox guards to participate in the palace defense, because it was inconvenient to mobilize them during the new year. After repeated persuasion from Zhang Genji, Cui Xianhui, and the others, she finally decided to postpone it until after the first month. The other matter was that she received the Prime Minister Yang Zixi while she was sick. No one knew what they discussed, but after half a day, Yang Zixi finally left the emperor's palace. Now, Zhang Changzong was the commander of the 1,000 ox guards and could legitimately command this army. Yang Zixi had always flattered Zhang Changzong and thought of himself as his disciple. Perhaps Wu Zetian's actions were because she heard Zhang Changzong's worries and confession and wanted to give them a layer of protection. However, for the Wu and Li parties who were secretly plotting something big, their hearts trembled. Thus, Zhang Genji, who seized every minute, resolutely decided to immediately carry out a military remonstrance. However, they also needed to make all kinds of preparations. Therefore, from the moment they received the news on the 16th of the first month and decided to carry out the military remonstrance, they had to prepare intensely for 5 days. Each day felt like a year before they finally started to carry out the plan. On the 22nd day of the first month, it snowed heavily. In the first month, state affairs were relatively relaxed. The prime ministers were all advanced in age, so they took turns to be on night duty at the Political Affairs Hall. This day was the day when Zhang Genji and Cui Xianhui, the two prime ministers, took turns on duty. In the afternoon, the snow was boundless, and it was getting heavier. Zhang Genji walked to the veranda and looked at the fine jade garden. He raised his hands and stretched his body. Zhang Genji was stretching his body when Cui Xianhui also walked out from his duty room. As soon as he saw Zhang Genji, he smiled and said, "General Meng, you are so free." Zhang Genji chuckled and said, "In the first month, government affairs are not busy, but I still have to sit this shift. I haven't dealt with anything this morning, and I'm so bored that my old bones are itching." Cui Xianhui said, "General Meng, why not play chess to pass the time?" Zhang Genji stroked his beard and thought for a moment. He nodded and said sure. He then strode to Cui Xianhui's duty room. As soon as the two of them entered the room, the two eunuchs guarding the hall closed the door and led them around the main hall where government affairs were handled. They turned into the room at the back where the prime minister rested. As the two of them walked in, the relaxed expressions on their faces unknowingly became grave and stern. There was no longer the slightest hint of a smile. The four of them stood still in the bedroom. Cui Xianhui made a hand signal to the two eunuchs. The two eunuchs pushed open the back window. Outside the window, it was also snowing heavily. There were two people standing in the snow. Their heads and shoulders were covered in a thick layer of snow. Only from the color of their robes, one could tell that they were also eunuchs in the palace. As soon as the window was opened, the four eunuchs inside and outside moved. They set up footstools and helped the two old prime ministers out of the window. Then they draped two cloaks that had been prepared in advance over their bodies, covering their heads, faces, and bodies. "My two sirs, please come this way." One of the eunuchs outside the window said in a low voice and hurriedly led Zhang Genji and Cui Xianhui away. The eunuchs who remained outside the window was very tall. With a solemn expression, he ordered the two eunuchs inside the room. "The two of you go back and guard the front hall. Don't let anyone discover that the two sirs have left." The two eunuchs responded and closed the window. The tall eunuchs raised his head and looked at the gray sky. The snow on his head rustled and fell. He did not speak, only pursed his lips, and then left in large strides. Looking at his appearance, it was Gao Leisure. Snow fell silently. Guards draped in oilcloth hoods stood ramrod straight under the black tortoise gate. The wind was erratic under the gate. The snowflakes drilled straight into the gate, causing the guards to squint their eyes. Ma Chiao had recovered from his illness. Holding the hilt of his knife, he nervously paced back and forth in the gate. Sometimes he walked into the gloomy gate, where even his figure could not be seen clearly. Sometimes he walked out again. The snow reflected his ashen face. It was not from the cold, but from nervousness. At this moment, he still felt like he was dreaming. Back then, he was just a ruffian who lived his days in a muddle-headed manner. Even when he heard the bell to open the gate, he was half asleep and had his eyes closed. It was this little commoner who could take on such an important mission and participate in the military remonstrance that would decide the fate of the country. In the distance, in the misty snow, a light carriage sped over. Seeing that the official banner was that of the Right Imperial Guard General Li Duozhua, Ma Chiao's eyes narrowed. The carriage he had been waiting for had finally arrived. Ma Chiao immediately waved his hand and said, "Open the gate and let them in." This was a matter of great importance. Right now, only he, the commander, knew about the military remonstrance. The soldiers under his command were still clueless, so Ma Chiao was especially nervous, so much so that his voice had slightly changed tone. Fortunately, the soldiers did not suspect anything. Once they heard the general's order, the guards immediately rushed forward, removed the bolts, and opened the heavy palace gates. At this time, the great general of the left Featherwood Guard, Wu Yi, was wearing a cloak and with a few guards slowly strolled along the palace walls to the top of the black tortoise gate. Seeing the carriage coming from below the city, Wu Yi couldn't help but cry out in surprise. Although this was the northern palace gate, it was rare to see a carriage in the palace. Wu Yi's heart was filled with suspicions. Because of the endless snow on the city walls, and because of his old age, his eyesight was limited. He wanted to go down the city walls to investigate. Tell them to stop for a moment. Wu Yi pointed to the bottom of the city and ordered the guards. He was about to go down the city. Great General Wu. Suddenly a shout came from behind. Wu Yi turned his head and saw the loyal General Yang Fan quickly running out of the gate tower. Ha ha ha! Great General, you are still patrolling the city after working so hard. Wu Yi pointed to the bottom of the city and asked, "Whose carriage is that?" Yang Fan glanced down at the city and said nonchalantly, "Oh, that is Great General Li Duozhua's carriage." Wu Yi snorted. This old man, what an imposing manner. Why is he riding a carriage? According to the customs of the Tang dynasty, civil and military officials all rode horses. Only a very small number of people who were too old and unable to move would ride carriages or carriages to court, such as Zhang Jinji. Yang Fan smiled. Great General Li fought in the northwest in the past, lying on the ice and lying in the snow. He got a pair of old cold legs. During the winter, his legs would act up and he would not be able to endure it. That's right, Great General. Just now, Great General Wu of the Jin Wu Guard sent a letter, inviting Great General to come over. This general was about to send someone to find Great General and coincidentally ran into him. While they were talking, because Wu Yi did not give any further instructions, the guard who was about to go down the city wall and order the carriage to stop also stopped. The city gate opened wide and the carriage left the city, following the empty northern city corridor and leaving only 2 deep and long ruts in the snow. Wu Yi heard Yang Fan's words and couldn't help but frown, thinking, "Why is Wu Yizong looking for me?" Wu Yi and Wu Yizong were both princes and great generals. Wu Yi was very dissatisfied that Wu Yizong did not take the initiative to visit and instead sent someone to deliver a letter. However, his temperament was not as domineering as Wu Yizong, and he did not want to damage their friendship over such a small matter. Frowning, he still decided to go. Wu Yi ordered his subordinates to bring the horses. After waiting for half an hour, The guards brought the horses from the stables. Wu Yi led a group of personal guards down the city walls, mounted the horses, and left the palace. Yang Fan stood on the city walls and looked down. Ma Qiao happened to raise his head from below the city walls. Their gazes met, sharp as a sword in the snow. Yang Fan nodded to Ma Qiao and turned to walk to the other side of the city walls. On the white imperial road outside the city walls, he saw Wu Yi and a group of guards galloping away. Yang Fan stood motionless on the city walls. In a moment, his head, shoulders, and body were covered in a thick layer of snow, making him look like a snowman. But he still did not move. It was as if he was not watching Wu Yi leave, but waiting for someone to come. Chapter 1090. Wu Yi's party gradually disappeared in the snow. After about the time it takes for 2 incense sticks to burn, a light carriage escorted by 8 guards came out of the snow. The 8 guards were all wearing fur coats and looked fat. They walked steadily on the road, and the light carriage in the middle was not fast. Step by step, they walked towards the black tortoise gate. The snowman, standing at the top of the black tortoise gate, suddenly moved. The white snow rustled down, and Yang Fan's vigorous figure appeared. He quickly walked towards the stairs and soon appeared at the bottom of the gate. He took a deep breath and ordered in a deep voice, "Open the gate!" Creak, 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 creak. The heavy palace gate opened again, and snowflakes floated in. It was unknown when, but the wind and snow became smaller. When the palace gate was completely opened, the light carriage also arrived in front of the palace gate. The 8 fur coat guards looked even stronger and fatter from a close distance. Yang Fan led the way and led the carriage inside. The soldiers guarding the black tortoise gate were somewhat puzzled. This group of people had entered the palace, but the general did not search them. He did not even check the identity of the people in the carriage. However, since the general had already done so, they would certainly not say anything. The carriage entered the palace under the escort of the 8 guards and soon stopped in front of the back palace wall of the palace. Yang Fan turned around and stood still. The 8 guards uniformly took off their hoods and revealed their white, fat, and beardless faces. They were the 8 female sumo wrestlers under Princess Taiping. The curtain of the carriage was lifted, and a beautiful woman dressed in a black fox fur coat walked out of the carriage. She was wearing a green-gray rat cloak and a Zhao Junwarm cover made of autumn sable on her head. She looked graceful, playful, and charming. The white fox fur collar around her neck was like a beautiful jade that was whiter than snow. It was indescribable. "Erlang!" Princess Taiping greeted Yang Fan with a smile on her face. However, her smile was slightly stiff. It was unknown whether it was because of the cold weather or because she was too nervous. Yang Fan did not exchange pleasantries with her and immediately said, "Quickly come with me." The carriage was driven to an inconspicuous corner of the hall by the coachman. Princess Taiping and the 8 female sumo wrestlers followed closely behind Yang Fan and circled to the front of the hall door. The main hall was empty, without any furnishings. It was obviously an unused palace. There was only one lamp burning in the hall, and a pretty figure was pacing back and forth restlessly in the hall. Yang Fan pushed the door open and said anxiously, "Xiaomiao? The princess is here." The light carriage with General Li Duozuo's banner hanging on it left the palace. First, it drove onto the Vermilion Bird Avenue. After speeding for a while, it turned into a square. By the time it came out of the square, the banner on the carriage had already disappeared. The carriage was heading towards the southern city. A few more carriages followed, each heading in a different direction. One of the carriages wandered around the city for a long time. At this time it was snowing heavily and there were very few people on the road, so it was easy to determine if someone was following them. After the carriage confirmed that no one was following them, it quietly drove into Zhang Jinji's mansion. There were already people waiting at the corner gate of the Zhang estate. The moment the carriage arrived, they immediately opened the gate and let the carriage drive into the courtyard. Several members of the clan came out with brooms and quickly swept away the ruts from the alley to the corner gate. The corner gate was then quietly closed. The carriage steadily stopped in the rear garden of Prime Minister Zhang's estate. Two people walked out of the carriage. Li Duozhua was not among these two. They were the Prime Minister Zhang, Genji, and Cui Xianhui, who were supposed to be on duty in the palace today. The two said nothing, their expressions grave and stern as they walked up to the hall. The hall was already packed with people. General of the Imperial Guards Jinghui, Li Zhan, Huan Yanfan, and the Prince of Xiang's estates, Major Yuan Shuji, were all waiting there. Not a single one of them was sitting on a chair. They were all anxiously pacing back and forth. Upon seeing the two enter, the crowd immediately welcomed them in pleasant surprise. "Master Zhang, Master Cui." All right, the two masters have returned. With the two masters presiding over the situation, the great undertaking will succeed. The Prince of Xiang's estates, Major Yuan Shuji, paid no attention to the excited chatter of the crowd. He shot forward and impatiently asked Zhang Genji, "Master Zhang, did you bring back the item?" "Zhang," Genji nodded and carefully took out a neatly folded piece of paper from his belt. Yuan Shuji unfolded the paper. The paper was printed with complicated inscriptions and numbers, as well as a few lines of freshly inked words. Yuan Shuji saw clearly the bright red seal of the Political Affairs Hall and the seals of the two prime ministers, Zhang Genji and Cui Xianhui. He happily nodded his head and folded the paper again. He carefully put it into his bosom and said to Zhang Genji and Cui Xianhui, "My Tu Xianggong, His Highness has been waiting anxiously. I will take my leave now." Zhang Genji solemnly nodded, while Cui Xianhui said, "Forgive me. Be careful on the road." Yuan Shuji hurriedly left, and the hall instantly fell silent. Everyone anxiously looked at Zhang Genji. The white-haired Zhang Genji slowly swept his gaze over the crowd. He saw that there was nervousness, excitement, anticipation, and apprehension on their faces, but there was no fear. He smiled in gratification. Zhang Genji's expression was solemn as he said in a deep and powerful voice, "Everyone's success or failure, life or death, will be decided today." Cui Xianhui cupped his hands to the sky and sternly said, "May Emperor Xian's spirit in heaven bless the Tang Empire and restore it to its former glory tonight." Jinghui and the others excitedly cupped their hands and said in unison, "May Emperor Xian's spirit in heaven bless the Tang Empire." Zhang Genji also cupped his hands high like the rest, but he did not speak with the crowd. He closed his eyes and listened to the prayers of the crowd, as if he was praying for something. Then he slowly opened his old and sharp eyes and said to the crowd, "Everyone, let's split up." A few moments later, several groups of people dispersed from Zhang Genji's estate. There were 3 sentry camps outside the Jinwu Guard's main camp, forming a tripod. Each camp had 10 soldiers of the Jinwu Guard, and in each sentry camp was a sentry tower over 10 zhang high, allowing one to see more than 10 li. It was just that it was a sunny day. In this kind of snowy weather, and it was dusk, Wu Yi was only discovered by the guards on the tower when he was less than 300 steps away from the sentry tower. The guards on the tower immediately sent out a signal. The soldiers in the sentry camp heard the alarm and went forward to inquire. Once they found out that the person coming was Great General Wu of the Yulin Guard, they naturally did not dare to stop him. As they let him pass, they also used sound and light signals to warn the rear camp. Thus, when Wu Yi rushed to the gate, Wu Yizong was already waiting there. To travel here on such a snowy day, Wu Yi could not help but be full of resentment. But seeing that Wu Yizong was already waiting respectfully at the gate with a smile on his face, Wu Yi's resentment dissipated. However, he still could not help but complain, "Such heavy snow! What matter do you have for me to come here?" Wu Yizong laughed heartily and said, "Of course there is a very good thing. Don't complain about your brothers after running a few steps because of the wind and snow. When you arrive at my commander's tent and understand the cause and effect, You will naturally know that I invited you here today to give you a great benefit." Wu Yi was puzzled and could not help but ask suspiciously, "What good matter is there that you would remember me? Look, saying this hurts people. It is fortunate that I am broad-minded and will not lower myself to your level." Wu Yizong said with a smile, but did not answer what the good matter was. He only led Wu Yi to the commander's tent. When they reached the commander's tent, Wu Yizong hurried forward 2 steps and stretched out his hand to lift the curtain. He said with a smile, "Please." Wu Yi saw that he was pretending to be mysterious and shook his head in amusement. He bent down and stepped into the tent. When Wu Yi entered the tent, he found that it was empty. There was only a person sitting high up in the commander's chair, flipping through something with his head lowered. Wu Yi looked closely and was shocked. He cried out involuntarily, "King Liang!" Wu Sansi raised his head and couldn't help but smile when he saw that it was him. "We are all brothers. Why are you calling me king?" It is too distant. Although Wu Yi was also a member of the Wu clan, he had always been loyal to Wu Zetian alone. Whether it was the struggle between King Liang and King Wei, or the struggle between the Wu clan and Li Tang, he had always stayed out of it. As a result, his relationship with this group of cousins was very shallow. Now that Wu Yizong had suddenly invited him to meet, and King Liang and King Wu Sansi had actually appeared in the Golden Guards camp on a snowy night, Wu Yi immediately guessed that something big had happened. He subconsciously gripped the hilt of his sword and turned around to rush out of the tent. Wu Yizong stood to the side with a smile, not stopping him. However, a dozen or so armored warriors immediately rushed in and surrounded him with murderous intent. Because more than a dozen people rushed in, before the curtain was lifted, Wu Yi clearly saw several of his personal guards standing straight outside. No less than a dozen sharp spears around them. Surrounding them were several dozen sharp spears. Wu Yi couldn't help but sigh. He knew that he couldn't escape. Wu Yi let go of the hilt of his sword and turned around to look at Wu Sansi coldly. "What are you trying to do?" Wu Yizong walked up to him with a smile. He took the sword from his waist and tossed it to one of the soldiers. Wu Yizong put his arm around Wu Yi's shoulder and walked forward. "Yi, we are brothers. Why would we harm you?" Wu Sansi also stood up. "That's right. We of the Wu family have to work together. We can't let outsiders take advantage of us. But you, all along, you have not been of one mind with your brothers. This time, I invited you here because I was afraid that you would make a mistake at a crucial moment and do something that would make your enemies happy. So I discussed with Yizong and specially invited you as a guest." Wu Sansi walked over to his side, pulled his arm, and affectionately said, "Let's go. A banquet has been prepared in the rear tent. We 2 brothers can drink and talk at the same time. This riddle, let Xiongdi personally solve it for you. Speaking of which, us 2 brothers really haven't had a heart-to-heart for many years." As Wu Sansi spoke, he gave Wu Yizong a look. He held Wu Yi's arm and walked to the back of the tent. A few guards followed closely behind. The 2 had just left the tent when they heard a loud dong sound. Wu Yi shuddered. Then he heard the incessant sound of drums, deafening like thunder on a snowy night. Chapter 1091. Wu Yi had been in the army for a long time and knew it was the generals gathering drum the moment he heard it. Wu Yi thought to himself, "This is an important place in the capital, and it's the first month. What is Wu Yizong trying to do by beating the drum to gather the generals?" Thinking of how Wu Sansi and Wu Yizong had placed her under house arrest, Wu Yi suddenly had an ominous feeling. Wu Yizong beat the drum to gather the generals. The generals of the various camps did not dare to be slow and rushed to the commander's tent. In an instant, all the generals arrived and reported their names. In a short while, all the generals gathered in the tent. The tent was filled with a murderous air. Some of these generals were Wu Yizong's confidants and had been instructed by him beforehand. Thus, they were very calm. Some really did not know what was happening and could not help but feel suspicious. However, No one dared to make a noise or whisper in each other's ears. They could only stand and await orders. In the back of the tent, there was indeed a banquet. Wu Sansi sipped his wine and said to Wu Yi, "This man, he has been moving forward his whole life. But is there only one way to move forward? No. Every step you take, there are countless forks in the road. Walk and choose and walk. But no matter if you choose right or wrong, there is no turning back." Wu Yi did not understand. Now that he was under someone's control, he could only calm down and listen. Wu Sansi sighed. "When I was young, our Wu family was considered a big family in the area. At that time, what I wanted the most was to get an official position when I grew up, or to become an influential gentleman in the area. Later, Aunt entered the palace, but she was only a talented person, and I did not have any ideas. Later, Aunt became the empress. It was then that I found out from my father that Aunt was not on good terms with us relatives. I did not think of becoming a relative of the emperor and using Aunt's power to climb up the ranks. But at that time, I did not expect Aunt to be so ruthless." Wu Sansi fell silent. Wu Yi still did not speak. However, he thought of everything that happened to the Wu family during that time. His cold expression slowly softened, and he sighed softly. Wu Sansi was silent for a while, then said, "The days when I was sent to Lingnan by my aunt were really tough. Father was always on tenterhooks, and I didn't have enough clothes to cover my body and food to fill my stomach. At that time, I thought that as long as I could eat my fill and wear a complete set of clothes, the Empress Aunt would never think of us again. That would be the best ending. But not long after, my father died. It was said that he was not acclimatized to the climate and died of a plague. Wu Sansi raised his head to look at Wu Yi, his eyes slightly red. "I have never thought of revenge, really even today. No matter what, it was Aunt who saved us from hell and gave us endless glory and wealth. I, Wu Sansi, owe it all to Aunt that I am who I am today. The Wu clan is also what it is today because of Aunt. Aunt placed the Wu clan in an important position, not because of blood relations, but because she had no other choice. It was because she wanted to become the empress, and she could not find a more reliable supporter than the Wu clan. She needed us, but if we wanted to live a good life, we had to rely on her even more. So, I am not close to Aunt, but I do not want to harm her." Wu Zetian's father was Wu Shiyu, and Wu Sansi's father, Wu Yuanqing, was Wu Shiyu's son. Wu Yi was Wu Shiyu's older brother and Wu Yuanqing's grandson. His father and Wu Yuanqing's father were separated from each other. Their relationship was distant, so he did not suffer Wu Zetian's persecution. So, hearing Wu Sansi's words, Wu Yi was unmoved. He only coldly said, "Is that so? Then what about everything you're doing now?" Wu Sansi said in a low voice, "What is it? I am almost 70 years old. What do you think I can do? I only want to preserve wealth and glory for my children and grandchildren. I don't want them to be like me when I was young, living a life of hunger and cold, waiting for death at any moment." Wu Sansi pointed at Wu Yi and said sternly, "You also have children and grandchildren. Don't you want to make arrangements for them? Aunt is already old. She has gone senile. She has been a loner all her life, and now that she is old, she wants to be close to her children and grandchildren. I accept it. Being close to our Wu family makes me happy. But she treats 2 juniors who don't share the same surname as her family. What does that mean?" Wu Yi said in a low voice, "You are talking nonsense." Wu Sansi was furious. He sprang up from his seat and anxiously paced around the tent. Zhang Yiji and Zhang Changzong, those 2 juniors, if they did not covet the glory and wealth she bestowed upon them, would they willingly serve a white-haired old woman with their young bodies? Even if she is wrong, our Wu and Li family, as children and nephews, can at most not let her be the head of the household. What can we do to her as an elder? But she actually trusts 2 outsiders so much. If you say she is not senile, then what is? My Wu family controls the army, and the Li family controls the government. Together, we support and protect the Zhou dynasty that she created. This was originally a national policy that she made, but now that her life is in danger, she allows the two Zhangs to control the palace. The children of the royal family, the relatives of the royal family, even the 6 ministries and 9 ministers. All the ministers are not allowed to see each other, and the two Zhangs can do whatever they want. She is not a housewife if a housewife trusts outsiders so much. Even if the two Zhangs make a fake will, we still have the law to follow and we can sue them in court. But she is the ruler of a country. Who else can uphold the law and uphold justice? Once the two Zhangs act recklessly and cause a great change, what will happen to the country that she created? What will happen to my Wu Sansi and my family? You. Wu Sansi turned around and pointed. Yi, do you think that you will be able to stay out of this? Wu Yi did not move, but the wine in her hand rippled slightly. All the generals gathered. Wu Yizong was fully armed, his hand holding a sharp sword, standing behind the marshal's table. All the generals cupped their fists, their armors clanging. Greetings to the marshal! Rise! Wu Yizong waved his hand and said in a deep voice, this marshal has received a warning that the left 1,000 Bull Guards camp is stirring. There seems to be a change, so I order all of you to immediately send out your troops, surround the left 1,000 Bull Guards camp, be on guard, and forbid the left 1,000 Bull Guards from making any moves. If there is anyone who disobeys, kill immediately, suppress the entire camp. Once these words came out, the generals who did not know the situation immediately became restless, and one of the generals questioned, Marshal, our Jinwu Guards and 1,000 Bull Guards are both Imperial Guards. Now that we have sent out our troops, it seems inappropriate to treat the 1,000 Bull Guards as enemies. I wonder if the Marshal has His Majesty's Tiger Seal and the Political Affairs Hall's transfer order? Wu Yizong glared and shouted, Fool! It's not like you don't know who the left 1,000 Bull Guards are. To tell you the truth, His Majesty has already been controlled by someone, isolated from the outside, unable to see each other. How can the Tiger Seal be sent out of the Imperial House? As the Emperor's Imperial Guards, it is time for us to uphold justice, to eliminate evil, to return peace to our world, and to brighten the world. Just as he was speaking, the curtain to the back of the tent was lifted, and Wu Sansi and Wu Yui appeared side by side. Wu Sansi looked at the generals in the tent with a smile, then turned to Wu Yui and said, What do you think? The morale of the troops can be used. Please. Wu Sansi respectfully waved at Wu Yui, and the two returned to the back of the tent. As they walked, Wu Sansi said, Yui, I will not force you to participate in our operation. Besides, if I really fail, as long as I can protect you, it can be considered a continuation of the Wu family's lineage. I only ask that you stay in this camp until the matter comes to an end. I will lock you up with your guards, and they can prove that you are not our accomplice. I hope you can understand this brother's painstaking efforts. Inside the marshal's tent, Wu Yizong said, This time it was great General Wu Yui of the Featherwood Guard who discovered Zhang Erzhang's plot. That is why he mobilized his troops to protect the capital while urgently reporting to King Liang. King Liang and great General Wu Yui of the Featherwood Guard have come together to mobilize troops. The palace will be protected by the Featherwood Guard, and we will be responsible for keeping an eye on Niu Qianwei to prevent them from attacking the city and alarming His Majesty. Does anyone have any objections? The generals all recognized King Liang, Wu Sansi, and great General Wu Yui of the Featherwood Guard. Seeing this scene, there were no more objections. Moreover, Wu Yizong's eyes were wide open, and his hand was already gripping the hilt of his sword. Even if there were still some misgivings, they did not dare to say anything more. Seeing that the generals were silent, Wu Yizong immediately grabbed a golden arrow of command and shouted, General Zheng, listen up! Immediately, lead your men to take control of the armory and distribute the weapons. Wu Yizong and Wu Sansi had already discussed this beforehand. At this time, the mobilization of troops and the orders were issued in an orderly manner. All the generals received their orders and left the camp. In a short while, people were shouting and horses neighing could be heard outside. The Golden Guards had been mobilized. Wu Yizong's eyes turned, and he waved his hand to summon a trusted aide. He lowered his voice and said, "Quickly send some of the more astute scouts to investigate the movements of the Black Tortoise Gate. Remember, send a few more people. If there is any news, report back at any time." Because it was winter, the sky darkened early. Coupled with the thick snowstorm, the sky was gloomy, so the sky darkened very early. However, the time of the curfew was still strict. Only when the day carving on the heavenly gate was over would the closing gate drum be sounded. After the drum had sounded 600 times, the 9 cities would be closed, and the Golden Guards would patrol the streets, prohibiting pedestrians from entering or leaving. In fact, there was no need for the Golden Guards to be on the streets on such a night. With the cold wind and heavy snow, who would come out in this kind of weather? But at this time, there was a figure hurriedly walking on the crossroads of Chongren Lane. At this time, other than those on night patrol, only imperial court messengers, weddings, funerals, and urgent matters such as buying medicine for illnesses could walk on the streets with the relevant proof. Of course, although those with special privileges could also go out after the curfew, that was an unwritten rule and was illegal. The person in front of him was going out to buy medicine. His name was Chu Kai, and he was a member of the Prime Minister's residence. Su Wei was a member of the Prime Minister's residence. Recently, Su Wei had been a bit cold and hot, which caused his asthma. The Prime Minister's residence originally had medicine, but it just so happened that one of the medicines was not enough, so he sent someone to the pharmacy to get medicine. As a servant of the Prime Minister's residence, Chu Kai was not worried that someone would block his way. With his hands in his sleeves, he shrunk his neck, carried the medicine bag, and hurriedly walked with his head down. Only when someone stopped him and asked him questions would he show his identity. Seeing that the gate of the residence was in sight, Chu Kai quickened his pace. But suddenly, 2 people jumped out from the side of the road and blocked his way. Chu Kai thought that it was another night patrol and impatiently said, "I was sent by the Prime Minister's residence." Before he could finish his words, the back of his head received a heavy blow. His eyes immediately closed, and he fainted on the ground. A black figure waved his hand and said in a deep voice, "Drag him away!" Chu Kai was dragged by his feet and quickly dragged away from the main road. His little finger was still hooked on the medicine bag, making a rustling sound on the snowy ground. On the left and right sides of Su Wei's residence, a few shadows appeared indistinctly. After a short pause, they quickly hid in the darkness. At the same time, on the left and right sides of the residences of Yang Zixi, Wei Qingqing, Wei Sili, Cui Xinqing, Fang Rong, and other important ministers of the Zhang faction, there were some mysterious shadows quietly moving around. Their residences had already been sealed. Chapter 1092. The curfew in the capital began at the 2nd watch period. In fact, on this cold winter night, there were not many people on the streets at the 1st watch period. At the 3rd watch period, the gates of Prime Minister Zheng's manor opened wide. 2 light carriages drove out one after the other, hurriedly speeding away under the escort of more than 20 armored guards. The small workers at the workshop had already been notified in advance. They didn't know why the Prime Minister wanted to leave the workshop in the middle of the night, but since the Prime Minister's manor had spoken, they would naturally comply. As soon as they saw the Prime Minister's carriage arrive, they hurriedly opened the workshop gates. Only when they saw the Prime Minister's carriage leave did they lock the workshop gates, yawn, and go back to sleep. At this moment, they would never have imagined that the weather would change the next morning. And among the people participating in the change of weather tonight, there were 2 people like them, also small workers at a workshop, except that the workshop was in Luoyang. At the 4th watch period, Yang Fan suddenly came down from the city gate tower, fully armored. Ma Qiao, Lu Yan, and Gao Chu had long been waiting downstairs. As soon as they saw Yang Fan arrive, they immediately went forward to greet him. Lu Yan, Gao Chu, Li Dayin, Zhang Shitong, and the others were all Yang Fan's earliest subordinates, and also the people he trusted the most. For this operation, Yang Fan had taken the opportunity of Zhang Jianji reorganizing the Yulin Guard to conduct a round of self-correction and self-inspection of the 1,000 riders. He transferred all these people into Ma Qiao's brigade, strengthening his control over the brigade's troops. Gather the soldiers. At Yang Fan's command, the well-trained 1,000 riders quickly gathered at the Black Tortoise Gate. These well-trained soldiers were already asleep, but at Yang Fan's command, they quickly and neatly dressed and rushed to the city gate. The entire process didn't take more than half an hour, and the entire process was silent. Everyone stood solemnly, and the north wind whistled. Li Dayan and Zhang Shidong led some of their trusted subordinates and stood on the left and right flanks of the brigade. They stared coldly at the solemn soldiers, guarding against any strange movements. Their hands seemed to be molded to the hilts of their swords, gripping them with unusual strength. Yang Fan looked with satisfaction at the 1,000 riders standing solemnly in front of him and said in a low voice, "Officers and soldiers, I have an important announcement tonight." Zhang Jianji and Cui Xuanhui's light carriage sped along Vermilion Bird Avenue. The patrolling officers and soldiers of the Golden Guards had already received Wu Yizong's orders in advance and had memorized the names of the few people who could not be stopped tonight. When they saw Zhang Jianji and Cui Xuanhui's identities illuminated by the lantern banners on the carriage, they did not step forward to stop them. They only stood solemnly by the roadside and watched the Prime Minister's carriage leave. Zhang Jianji and Cui Xuanhui's carriage traveled all the way into the imperial palace. Yang Yuanyan, Jing Hui, Huan Yanfan, and the others had already gathered their most trusted confidants, no less than a dozen people each, and were waiting there. As soon as the 2 prime ministers arrived, they immediately followed behind the 2 prime ministers' carriage and sped toward the Black Tortoise Gate. The procession behind the 2 prime ministers grew larger and larger. Finally, 500 or 600 people were gathered, all of them armed with spears and daggers. They walked along the horse road in the middle of the city. Not a single person made any noise. Only the sound of orderly and heavy footsteps and the grinding of armors could be heard, and the sonorous sound of the clanging of armors emitted a murderous aura. At the foot of the Black Tortoise Gate, the procession stopped. The heavy palace gate was tightly shut. The towering city gate resembled a crouching, prehistoric beast. Zhang Jianji was helped down from the carriage. He raised his head to look at the city gate, then exchanged a glance with Cui Xianhui. Suppressing his excitement, he ordered in a low voice, "Send the signal." Immediately, 2 imperial guards lit a lantern and raised it toward the top of the city gate. First to the left, then to the right they turned 3 times. Suddenly, a lantern lit up on top of the city gate. It swayed 3 times toward the bottom of the city gate before extinguishing. A moment later, the city gate creaked open. The pitch-black city gate resembled the wide, open mouth of a giant beast. Jing Hui nervously glanced at Zhang Jianji. Although the other party had opened the city gate, it meant that there was no ambush, because if the people inside were hostile toward them, they would definitely not take the risk of letting them enter the palace. The palace gate would definitely be tightly shut. At this moment, the Black Tortoise Gate should be under their control. But this pitch-black darkness still made people feel apprehensive. Zhang Jianji took a deep breath and solemnly said, "Follow this old man." He was very clear that he could only trust Yang Fan now. There was no turning back now. Since things had come to this, it was already impossible for him to turn back. Even if there was an ambush inside, even if this was a dragon's pool or a tiger's den, he still had to charge in. "I'll go first." Yang Yuanyan placed his saber horizontally in front of his chest and rushed into the Black Tortoise Gate. Jing Hui and Huan Yanfan steeled their hearts and immediately led their trusted imperial guards to follow closely behind. Li Zhan and the rest protected Zhang Jianji and Cui Xianhui in the middle as they followed the vanguard. "Master Zhang, Master Cui." Suddenly, a lantern appeared in front of them. Borrowing the weak light, they clearly saw that the person standing behind was Li Duozhua. Zhang Jianji and Cui Xuanhui's tensed hearts suddenly relaxed. If Black Tortoise Gate's general, Yang Fan, had any ulterior motives, he would definitely capture Li Duozhua first. Since Li Duozhua was here, the Black Tortoise Gate should be safe. The three of them held each other's hands tightly. Li Duozhua said, "Since the two of you have arrived, this general can rest assured. The royal forest guards can immediately move out." Li Duozhua said as he took out a tiger tally from his robe and called out in a low voice, "Qingxuan!" Li Duozhua's son, Li Qingxuan, was also dressed in armor, and he hurried forward to welcome them. Li Duozhua passed the tiger tally to him and said solemnly, "Take my token and return to the army quickly. Tell your Uncle Zhao, Uncle Chao, and your brother-in-law to strictly guard against the right Imperial Forest Guards according to our previous agreement. If necessary, we can meet on the battlefield. We must ensure that not a single soldier can kill their way to the Black Tortoise Gate." "Yes," Li Qingxuan replied and took the tiger tally from his father's hands. Then he led a few tiger guards and left in a hurry. Zhang Jianji didn't give Yang Fan the cold shoulder. The two of them had interacted back in Jianan. Now that they met again, Zhang Jianji solemnly cupped his fists and bowed to Yang Fan, saying, "General has conspired with us on this important matter. We will surely go down in history forever." Carrying the lantern, Yang Fan said, "Premier Zhang is too courteous. The preparations have already been made. Time is of the essence, so let's move out immediately." Yang Fan's words reminded everyone. Zhang Jinji immediately said, "That's right. We will move out immediately." Immediately, Zhang Jianji hurriedly assigned the tasks. The first group was led by Li Duozhua, Li Zhan, and Wang Tongjiao. They were to go straight to the Eastern Palace to receive the Crown Prince. The Crown Prince was where the righteous cause of this operation lay. This banner had to be received. The second group would be led by Zhang Jianji, Cui Xianhui, Jinghui, and Huan Yanfan. They would immediately head for the immortal welcoming hall where the emperor resided. The third group would be led by the right Imperial Guard General, Yang Yuanyan, and the left Imperial Guard General, Xue Sixing. They would accompany Yang Fan to guard the Black Tortoise Gate. Once the Crown Prince arrived, they would close the Black Tortoise Gate and have 1,000 cavalrymen guard this important place. Yang Fan, Yang Yuanyan, Xue Sixing, and the others would escort the Crown Prince to chase after Zhang Jinji. The group split into 3 groups and went their separate ways. The light in front of the Black Tortoise Gate was extinguished. The night was dark and the snowy light was dim. Only the bells on the walls of the Black Tortoise Gate could be heard. At this time, the Crown Prince, Li Xian, was already fast asleep. Speaking of which, it was funny. Tonight, inside and outside Chang, and countless people were sharpening their knives and running around. The flames of war had already been lit, but Li Xian, the commander-in-chief of the 3 armies, was completely unaware. Because they considered that he was too timid and feared that he would drag them down, no one dared to tell him. But Li Xian didn't know, but his trusted eunuchs knew. These eunuchs were all people who honor had chosen to serve Li Xian after he was made crown prince. These eunuchs did not sleep tonight. They had been quietly waiting in front of the Eastern Palace until Li Duozhua and the others arrived outside. Wang Tongjiao and the eunuchs guarding the gate exchanged a secret signal, and then they immediately opened the palace gate. After Li Xian returned from Fangzhou to the capital, he quickly arranged for his daughters to marry off. Among them, Princess Ning had taken a fancy to Wang Tongjiao, so Wang Tongjiao was Li Xian's son-in-law. Because of this relationship, the matter of colluding with the eunuchs of the Crown Prince's palace was handed over to him. When the palace gate opened, Wang Tongjiao, Li Duozhua, Li Zhan, and the others immediately swarmed in. 4 imperial guards were left at the gate, standing guard with their blades drawn. The head eunuchs of the palace led them into the crown prince's residence. Li Xian did not sleep on the same bed as Consort Wei. His body had long since lost the ability to engage in sexual intercourse, but his wife was in the prime of her life. Often seeing his wife's resentful eyes made him uncomfortable, so he usually slept alone at night. At this moment, Li Xian was in the middle of a drunken roar when he was suddenly startled awake. Li Xian had just woken up when he found that several eunuchs were supporting him, hurriedly helping him dress. His son-in-law, Wang Tongjiao, was standing in front of the bed. Li Xian asked in a daze, "What happened? Tongjiao, why are you here?" Wang Tongjiao bowed and said, "Crown Prince, Master Zhang and Master Cui have already gone to greet the Emperor at the Immortal Palace. This son-in-law is accompanied by Grand General Li Duozhua and General Li Zhan. They have come to take the Crown Prince to greet the Immortals and discuss important matters together." Ah! Li Xian was shocked, his back instantly drenched in sweat. He was not stupid. Once he heard Wang Tongjiao say this, he understood. Li Duozhua and Li Zhan were waiting at the door. Seeing that Li Xian had already put on his robe, they immediately flashed in and bowed deeply to Li Xian, saying, "The heavens bless Imperial Tang. The Northern Gate and Southern Yamen have unanimously decided to support the Crown Prince in restoring the Tang dynasty. Your Highness, please follow this subject out of the Eastern Palace and lead the officials to the Immortal Palace to eradicate the traitors." Grand General Li Xian's entire body trembled. He was truly frightened by Li Duozhua's words, to the point that he even stuttered. "Grand General, doing this, I'm afraid it's not appropriate." Li Zhan stamped his feet and said, "Your Highness, the Northern Gate Imperial Guards have unanimously pledged their loyalty. This is a rare opportunity. Crown Prince, please quickly enter the inner palace to deal with the traitors. We have disregarded our clans and risked our lives to come here. Your Highness, you must not hesitate any longer. The opportunity is fleeting. If you continue to hesitate, I'm afraid that we will all perish together." As Li Zhan spoke, he signaled his two subordinates with his eyes. Without waiting for Li Xian to dress properly, he carried him out of the palace. "What happened? Who are you people?" Following a stern shout, 2 lanterns were lit and a figure leisurely walked in. The newcomer was Consort Wei. Her residence was not far from Li Xian's residence. With such a large commotion, how could she not hear it? Consort Wei hurriedly got up, put on a robe, and ran out. Seeing someone supporting her husband, she couldn't help but turn pale with fright. Hearing the commotion, Wang Tongjiao drew his saber with a "Come!" Seeing that it was his mother-in-law, dressed simply and revealing her naked body, he hastily sheathed his saber. Lowering his gaze, he respectfully said, "Crown Prince Consort, we will escort the Crown Prince to the Immortal Palace to meet up with the Prime Ministers. We will execute the traitors, clean out the Emperor's side, and restore our Li Tang's empire." The matter was urgent, and there was no time to explain in detail. As Wang Tongjiao spoke, the crowd had already supported Li Xian as they walked out. Hearing her son-in-law's words, Consort Wei was stunned. For a moment, she didn't know whether she was shocked or happy. Chapter 1093. North of Chang, and was where the Imperial Guards were stationed. Among the guards, the left and right Featherwood Guards were the closest to the Black Tortoise Gate. In front of them was the 1,000 cavalry camp. Deep into the night, Major Min Yongbua of the Featherwood Guard returned from patrolling the camp. He took off his saber and tossed it on the table before slowly pacing with his hands behind his back. Featherwood General Wang Degong, who had accompanied him back from patrolling, yawned and was about to return to his tent to sleep. Seeing him like this, he couldn't help but ask in puzzlement, "Major Min, is there something on your mind?" Min Yongbua nodded, then shook his head. "It's already late, but the Grand General still hasn't returned to camp." Wang Dagong laughed. "Didn't the King of Hanoi invite him to visit the Jinwu Guards? Perhaps the 2 brothers are sitting down to drink and have a long chat." It's also possible that they won't return tonight. What are you worried about? Min Yongbwa said, Impossible. The Grand General has never been greedy. Moreover, you know the Grand General's character. In military affairs, the Grand General has never slacked off. How could he not give us an explanation? Even if he doesn't return, he should at least send a bodyguard back to report. Wang Dagong was still unconcerned and said, You, who can harm the great general? Besides, the Grand General is going to the Jin Wu Guards. That's the Wu family's territory. Min Yongbwa snorted. Is it rare to see family members turn against each other? He also felt that these words were inappropriate. They seemed to imply that the Wu family was not on good terms. He coughed and beckoned to Wang Dagong. Wang Dagong moved in front of him. Min Yongbwa lowered his voice and said, A few days ago, His Majesty had the Grand General issue a secret edict, instructing him to strengthen the palace's security, especially before the 1,000 ox guards change guard. Otherwise, why do you think the Grand General has been patrolling the palace every day? Wang Dagong was shocked. There's such a thing. Wang Dagong was also Wu Yui's confidant. Since the conversation had reached this point, Min Yongbwa did not hide anything from him and said, That is correct. The Grand General has always been loyal to His Majesty and has never discounted His Majesty's orders. Why do you think he would suddenly leave, give up his official duties of patrolling the city, and not give us any explanation? I feel uneasy. Wang Dagong was a pure general. There was no problem in fighting a war, but he was not good at this kind of intrigue. He scratched his head and said awkwardly, Then what should we do? Min Yongbwa thought for a moment, then said, The matter of the Grand General receiving a secret edict has only been explained to me. From the Grand General's tone, it seems that the capital has not been peaceful recently. It's better to be safe than sorry. How about this? I'll lead a group of men to patrol the palace on behalf of the Grand General while you go to the Jin Wu Guards. The Grand General won't blame us for being meddlesome. Although Wang Dagong was already sleepy, he could only agree to Min Yongbwa's words. The two of them immediately reorganized their personal guards. Wang Dagong led 20-odd subordinates, while Min Yongbwa led 100 men. Both of them mounted their steeds and galloped out of the gate. The two groups of people galloped out of the gate and traveled to Li. Before they could part ways, one to the south and one to the north, a shrill whistle suddenly rang out in the darkness. The whistle filled the air and was clearly a whistling arrow. The two of them reined in their horses at the same time, their hearts filled with bewilderment. At this time, a group of men and horses suddenly appeared in the snowy fields. Because of the reflection of the snow, the night was not so dark that they could not see anything. They could clearly see the figures of the people. It was a dense mass of people, and they could not immediately count them. Since the other party had used the whistling arrow, they were clearly not afraid of exposing their tracks. Min Yongbwa and Wang Dagong could not imagine what they would encounter at the gate of the camp. Min Yongbwa quietly signaled for an imperial bodyguard to return to the camp to report while he stood there with his cavalry, hoping to understand what was going on. A rough and bold voice came from the darkness. Haha, my good brothers of Zuyulin, where are you going in the middle of the night? Min Yongbwa felt that the person's voice was somewhat familiar, but could not immediately recall who it was. He sternly asked, Who are you? That person laughed loudly. Amidst the laughter, a muffled grunt suddenly came from behind Min Yongbwa. Min Yongbwa turned his head to look and saw that the imperial bodyguard he had ordered to return to the camp to report had just galloped away from the main group of people and fell head first from his horse. There was no one near him, and it was clear that he had been attacked by a crossbow or similar weapon. Immediately, in the snowy ground behind them, a row of figures suddenly stood up and approached them step by step. Min Yongbwa's subordinates became uneasy, and Min Yongbwa's horse impatiently spun 2 rounds. Min Yongbwa gently patted the horse's mane and calmed it down. In a deep voice, he said, Do not panic. Silence. Min Yongbwa knew that the situation was not good, but he had clearly been surrounded. The group of people approaching from the front all had long spears and large halberds, and were lined up in an orderly formation. The people coming to flank him from the back all had flat weapons. Although it could not be seen clearly from their movements and figures, it was clear that they were all crossbows. At this distance, Min Yongbwa's men only had time to accelerate and charge once. But there were too many unfavorable conditions for them. Firstly, it was late at night and the ground was covered in snow. Charging at full speed was not fast. Secondly, they were all equipped with short weapons. If the other side didn't have long spears and large halberds, they had strong bows and hard crossbows. Even if he launched a charge, he would not be able to win. Moreover, although these people's hostility was obvious, no matter how he thought about it, he did not feel that the other side would indiscriminately kill him. As a result, he did not have the courage to fight to the death. In this way, the two sides were getting closer and closer. By the time the other side's spears and halberds neared, they had already lost the effective distance for their horses to accelerate and had even less thoughts of attacking. The other side's men stopped. Only one saber-wielding general advanced alone. Only when he came close did Min Yongbwa clearly see the person approaching. This person was the Right Imperial Guard General Yi Huli, the son-in-law of the Right Imperial Guard General Li Duizhua. Min Yongbwa thought of the secret edict that great General Wu had received, and his face began to turn green. "General Yi Huli, what are you doing?" Yi Huli nonchalantly slapped his scabbard and loudly said, "Second Zhang has bewitched the Son of Heaven and brought disaster to the court. The Imperial Guards of the Northern Gate and Southern Office, under the command of the Crown Prince, the Prince of Xiang, and the various prime ministers, have already charged into the palace to exterminate the traitors. Major Min, you can't get involved in these muddy waters." Wang Dagong was so angry that his face turned purple. "Where is our great general?" he angrily asked. Yi Huli craftily smiled. "He's currently a guest at the king of Hanoi's place. Don't worry, great General Wu Yi is safe and sound. His Highness, the Prince of Liang, is currently drinking wine with him." Min Yongbwa and Wang Dagong were even more shocked. Wu Sanxi and Wu Yizong were also participating? No wonder Yi Huli dared to boast that the Imperial Guards of the Northern Gate and Southern Office had responded to the Crown Prince's mutiny. With the Crown Prince, the Prince of Xiang, and the Prime Ministers of the Political Affairs Hall taking the lead and the Wu clan secretly supporting them, wouldn't this be the entire court rebelling? Wang Dagong nervously asked Min Yongbwa, "Sima, what should we do?" Min Yongbwa looked around at the soldiers of the Right Guard Forest, glaring at him like tigers. In a hoarse voice, he asked, "Brother Yi Huli, what do you want to do?" Yi Huli replied, "I invite the two of you to rest in my army. At daybreak, you will be free. What do the two of you think?" Min Yongbwa gripped his horse tightly. For a moment, he could not make up his mind. He could feel his palms drenched in sweat. Yi Huli raised his hand. The soldiers with spears and halberds immediately took 3 steps forward. Their orderly footsteps treaded on the thick snow, creating a heart-chilling sound. At the same time, the archers in the rear, who had maintained a certain distance from them the entire time, also moved, assuming an offensive stance. Wang Dagong raised a saber and urgently called out, "Sima!" Min Yongbwa clenched his teeth and sternly ordered, "Disarm! Dismount!" Li Xian's clothes were disheveled. He did not even put on his boots properly. Naturally, he did not put on his thick and warm outer robe. Supported by someone, his feet did not touch the ground as he walked to the palace gate. A gust of cold wind blew against his face. Li Xian shivered, and his muddled mind suddenly became clear. He thought of his mother's iron fist, thought of his mother's powerful control. Can tonight's mutiny really succeed? Although the two Zhang's power is growing day by day, can they still be the emperor? I am the crown prince. My position as the crown prince has not changed. Mother's illness is beyond cure. The emperor's throne is within my reach. Why should I take this risk? Li Xian looked left and right and saw that Li Duozhua, Li Zhan, and the others all had impassioned expressions. Li Xian thought to himself, these people are taking advantage of the empress's critical illness to launch a mutiny. The so-called killing of the two Zhangs to protect the Tang dynasty is merely to covet the merit of ascending to the throne. My status has long been set. As long as I know my place, the emperor's throne will definitely be mine. Why should I take this risk with them? Thinking of this, Li Xian suddenly struggled, shaking off the two attendants supporting him. He tightly gripped the palace gate, unwilling to walk out. Wang Tongjiao was stunned. Your Imperial Highness, what's wrong? Li Xian trembled as he said, the country's grand plans will be handled by the Empress. The so-called military remonstrance is no different from rebelling against the superiors. It is not the conduct of an official. Gu cannot go. Hearing this, the veins on Wang Tongjiao's forehead bulged. If the crown prince did not go, wouldn't it really be considered a rebellion? Without the crown prince, how could they convince the masses? If the news spread, those 500 warriors who had sacrificed their lives would most likely scatter and flee for their lives. Wouldn't everyone be finished? Wang Tongjiao also did not stand on ceremony. With a red face and neck, he said to his father-in-law, Your Imperial Highness, the former emperor paid your Imperial Highness with a divine artifact, but your Imperial Highness was unexpectedly crippled. Both humans and gods are indignant. It has been 23 years. Today, with the spirit of heaven and earth, the North Gate Imperial Guards and the South Gate Prime Minister will work together to punish the traitors and restore the Li family. Your Imperial Highness, please immediately head to the Black Tortoise Gate in order to uphold the masses' expectations. Li Xian's 2 feet stomped on the ground, his buttocks falling backwards. His hands tightly hugged the gate as he fearfully said, Treacherous and vile people should naturally be killed. However, Her Majesty's dragon body is unwell. What if we mobilize our troops into the inner palace and frighten her? Wouldn't Gu bear the name of being unfilial? In Gu's opinion, you all should temporarily disperse. Let's discuss this at length. Hearing this, Li Zhan's eyes turned red. What kind of nonsense is this? You want us to disperse now? You've already caused such a big commotion. Do you think everyone else is a dead pig? Dispersing now is tantamount to suicide. If this idiot who was as timid as a mouse was not the current crown prince, Li Zhan would have already kicked him to death. Li Duozhua, who was standing to the side, wanted to cry but had no tears. He did not expect that the first problem of the military remonstrance would actually come from His Imperial Highness, the crown prince, whom they wholeheartedly wanted to support to ascend to the throne. Chapter 1094. Suppressing his anger, Li Zhan said to Li Xian, The generals disregard their clans and protect the country. What can your highness do to them? Now that things have come to this, it's like an arrow on a bowstring that has to be released. This subject is powerless to persuade the soldiers. If your highness is unwilling to go, then please persuade the soldiers yourself. Although Li Zhan was angry, he also understood that once the mission was accomplished, this good-for-nothing crown prince would become the emperor. Once he became the emperor, he wouldn't necessarily be so good-for-nothing. If he offended the emperor too much now, there was no need to mention his merit. Perhaps the new emperor would remember his rudeness today and give him a pair of small shoes. Thus, although his tone was resentful, his words were tactful. At this time, the guards at the palace gate all heard Li Xian's words. Each and every one of them breathed heavily and their eyes turned red, as if they were about to go berserk. Right now, Li Xian had dropped the ball. He was clearly trying to push everyone to their deaths. Looking at the pained and angry eyes, Li Xian immediately understood that things had come to this and there was no turning back. If he dared to cower, these angry soldiers would probably eat him alive. Li Xian trembled and loosened his hands. He muttered, I am willing to go with everyone. Please, do not disturb the Queen Mother. This was a race against time. Li Jian didn't have the time to listen to Li Xian's nonsense. He immediately waved his hand, and 2 soldiers picked up Li Xian and rushed out the door. Immediately, a soldier brought over a horse that had already been prepared. Everyone hastily helped Li Xian onto the horse and rushed towards the Black Tortoise Gate. The second Black Tortoise Gate change in the history of the Tang dynasty had officially begun because of the arrival of Li Xian, the indispensable protagonist. Under the Black Tortoise Gate, the right Imperial Guard General Yang Yuanyan, the left Imperial Guard General Xue Sixing, and 1,000 of Yang Fan's horsemen were guarding the gate. The gate was ajar, leaving a gap the width of a person. Yang Yuanyan and Xue Sixing were like ants on a hot pan, occasionally poking their heads out to look. Only Yang Fan remained calm. Suddenly, a group of people rushed over from the distance. Yang Yuanyan immediately unsheathed his saber and asked in a low voice. Li Jian answered and hurriedly said, "The Crown Prince is here." Under the Black Tortoise Gate, the soldiers were in an uproar. Although no one dared to shout, their excitement was evident. At this point, Li Xian couldn't turn back. Once he calmed down, he understood that this was the time to appease the hearts of the people. As soon as he saw the people coming up to greet him, he stammered, You've worked hard. Today, all of you have risked your lives for the sake of the country." Seeing the crowd, Yang Yuanyan said, "Xian the Prince, Prince Xian and Chui Xian, Master, Yang Prince, Yang Palace Prince, Yang Palace Palace Xian." To Li, Yang said, Li Yang Xian, Li Yang Master, and Yang Prince, Xian Palace, Xian Palace, Yang Xian, Yang Xian, said Yang Xian Prince. Xian and Fan said to Ma, "Emperor, King, Yang Xian, Yang Palace, Yang Xian Yang." Ma replied and shouted, "Close the gate." The heavy Black Tortoise Gate slammed shut with a loud bang, and a bolt as thick as a person's arm fell down. Ma Qiao and the others immediately armed themselves and entered the city. Yang Fan also raised his saber and chased after the Crown Prince with Xue Sixing and Li Jian. "Open the gate!" Li Qingqi stood in front of the Taiji Palace and shouted angrily. The Prince of Xiang, accompanied by Sima Yuan Shuji of the Prince of Xiang's estate and his 5 sons, armed to the teeth, set out at 1:45 in the second watch period. By this time they had already arrived at the Vermilion Bird Gate in front of the Taiji Palace, the headquarters of the Southern Guard. The Imperial Army guarding the capital was divided into the north and the south. The 6 Imperial Guards of the Northern Guard were actually the Emperor's personal army. They did not need the court's official order to mobilize troops, nor did they obey the court's orders. They were directly under the Emperor. On the other hand, the 16 Guards of the Southern Guard were the true army of the state. They needed the Emperor's decree, the Prime Minister's seal, and the Ministry of War's approval before they could be mobilized. Most of the guards guarding the various gates of the capital were the Imperial Army of the Southern Guard, mainly consisting of the Meritorious Guard, Feather Guard, Imperial Guard, Left and Right Guard, Left and Right Guard, Left and Right Guard, and the Crown Prince's 3 residences and 3 guards. The various guards took turns on duty, and the garrison and duty intersected. Even the high-ranking officers intersected with each other. The Emperor used this method of mutual inspection to prevent a certain high-ranking officer from monopolizing power. Li Qingqi and Li Qingyi reined in their horses and sternly shouted at the Taiji Palace guards, "Open the gate!" When the guards saw them openly carrying weapons, they couldn't help but be aghast and hurriedly raised their spears to guard. In a loud voice they shouted, "Who goes there? Do you have an imperial edict from the Emperor? Where are the escorts and gate guards?" Not just anyone could rashly enter an important military area. To enter this important military area, one had to have an imperial edict from the Emperor and be guided by escorts and gate guards. Those soldiers also acted according to the rules. With a shout, Li Qingqi raised his spear and shouted, "The prefecture magistrate of Bingzhou, the great general of the Left Guard, the Crown Prince's Guard, the Protector General of Anbei, and His Highness the Prince of Xiong have arrived. Who dares to block the way? The Tang dynasty followed the Sui system. The left and right guards were the heads of the 16 guards of the Southern Guard, and Li Dan, the great general of the left guard, was also the highest commander of the 16 guards of the Southern Guard. But although Li Dan's series of official titles sounded rather frightening, the majority of the guards and horses in the capital were managed by generals. The position of Great General was an empty title, and Li Dan's title of Great General was an even more empty one. But only the generals understood this principle. How could these lowly soldiers understand this principle? Even if they did, they wouldn't have the courage to resist the Great General. In just a moment of shock, Li Qingqi and Li Qingyi had already rushed to the gate. Thrusting out their spears, they exerted strength with their arms and, with a loud shout, sent the 2 barricades flying more than a zhang away. Then they took their horses and left. Yuan Shuji, Li Longji, and the others led the Prince of Xiong's estate's adjunct, general, and other civil and military officials, as well as several dozen personal guards of the estate, to protect the Prince of Xiong as they charged into Taiji Palace. The generals of the guards in Taiji Palace were roused by the urgent drumming of the generals. They hurriedly got up and rushed to the main hall of Taiji Palace. They saw that the hall was brightly lit, and several dozen soldiers in bright armor and wielding sharp blades were arrayed on the left and right sides of the hall. At the very front were 5 young generals dressed in golden armor. They were escorting a middle-aged man dressed in imperial robes, who was solemnly standing behind the commander's desk. The Prince of Xiong, Li Dan, solemnly stood behind the commander's desk. He held up the seal of the 2 prime ministers of the Political Affairs Hall and sternly said, "The 2 Zhangs have rebelled and coerced the Emperor of Heaven. Today, the Northern Gate and the Southern Office will eliminate the traitors. Master Zhang and Master Chui have already followed the Crown Prince and led the Featherwood Guard into the palace to capture the traitors. This prince is acting on the Crown Prince's orders to take charge of the Southern Office." The generals couldn't help but look at each other. The Prince of Xiong's words were pleasant to hear. Everyone knew that this was a rebellion against the Emperor. But since the Prince of Xiong had appeared here, the Crown Prince entering the palace was probably true. And if the Crown Prince entered the palace, it would be impossible without the cooperation of the Featherwood Guard and the 1,000 cavalry of the Northern Gate Imperial Army, the Son of Heaven's personal guards. So, when they thought about how the Son of Heaven was old and gravely ill, so weak that he couldn't even preside over the New Year celebrations, the new Emperor's ascension was inevitable. Who would want to resist? Moreover, the Son of Heaven had always relied heavily on the Northern Gate Imperial Army and treated the guards of the Southern Office as if they were raised by his stepmother. In terms of supplies, and pay, they were far inferior to the Northern Office. If the Northern Office had rebelled, how could they be loyal subjects? These thoughts were only one aspect. More importantly, if the Prince of Xiong dared to lead such a small force to take over the Southern Office, who knew which of these generals had already pledged their allegiance to the Prince of Xiong? If they questioned him, would someone immediately pull out a saber and cut them down? Thus, when the Prince of Xiong finished speaking, the hall was utterly silent. For a long time, not a single one of the generals raised a single question. It was true that this move was partly because the Son of Heaven favored the Northern Office Imperial Army and neglected the Southern Office, causing the Southern officers to resent him. But with so many officers present, not a single one of them stood up. This would have been impossible a few years ago. Wu Zetian's old age had truly become her greatest fatal wound. Her influence, ability to rally supporters, and ability to control were all rapidly disappearing. The Prince of Xiong swept his gaze around and sternly shouted, 10 guards of the Eastern Palace, step forward! The 10 guards of the Eastern Palace were the Crown Prince's left and right guards, military title, Chouching, the Crown Prince's left and right imperial officers, military title, LV Ben, the Crown Prince's left and right clear officers, military title, Jideng, the Crown Prince's left and right guard officers, and the Crown Prince's left and right inner officers. Of these, the first 6 commanded 3 to 5 regiments of subjugation, while the last 4 commanded only the soldiers of the inner estate. The 10 guards of the Eastern Palace had originally been the Crown Prince's personal army. But ever since Wu Zetian became Empress Dowager, the Crown Prince's military authority over the 10 guards of the Eastern Palace had been stripped away. But Wu Zetian could only strip the Crown Prince of his military authority over the 10 guards of the Eastern Palace, but she could not abolish the organization of the 10 guards of the Eastern Palace, so the 10 guards of the Eastern Palace still remained. But because of this, the Empress was also the most vigilant against the 10 guards of the Eastern Palace. The treatment of the Southern Imperial Army was lower than that of the Northern Imperial Army, and the treatment of the 10 guards of the Eastern Palace was even lower than that of the Southern Imperial Army. One could easily imagine what the officers of the 10 guards of the Eastern Palace were feeling, and their loyalty to the Son of Heaven was even less important. For this reason, the Prince of Xiang had long ago ordered Minister of War Yuan Shuji to make contact with the officers of the 10 guards of the Eastern Palace. Yuan Shuji had not told them the supreme secret of the military remonstrance. He had only probed and understood them so that he had a certain degree of confidence. The current situation was critical, and the Prince of Xiang was a bit like a fox borrowing the tiger's might. Only by starting with the 10 guards of the Eastern Palace could he turn the pretense into reality. The officers of the 10 guards of the Eastern Palace hesitated for a moment, then stepped forward one by one. As they stepped forward, they still looked left and right, hesitating. Once they stood in front of Li Dan, they knew that since they had taken the stance, there was no way out. As a result, their movements and voices were uniform as they greeted Li Dan, paying respects to the great general. Li Dan raised his voice. Army of the Supercheng. Quickly follow this prince's secretary to join the army, Qiu Yu. Increase the defenses of the east and west cities. Remember, do not approach the imperial palace. At this point, the general of the Supercheng no longer wanted to retreat. Of everyone present, he was the one who favored Li Teng the most, so he loudly agreed. A person walked out from Li Dan's side and clasped his hands to him. General, please follow me. Li Dan added, Army of the Lu Ben, quickly follow this prince to join the army, Dosia. Assist the Jin Wu guards in controlling Vermilion Bird Avenue and all the beacons in the capital. Do not allow anyone to approach. With the Super Cheng's agreement, the commander of the Lu Ben no longer had any misgivings. Moreover, the 10 guards of the Eastern Palace should be under the Crown Prince's command. Their sense of belonging is the strongest. Therefore, they readily agreed and hurriedly left with Dosia. Li Dan continued, Army of the Zhidang, quickly follow this prince's secretary, Qiu Wan. Control all the roads from the south to the north. Do not allow anyone to enter or leave. The commander of the Zhidang army respectfully acknowledged. Li Dan continued, Where is the left commander of the Eastern Palace? This general is here. Quickly follow the Prince of Linzi to arrest Zhang Tongxiu and his family. Where is the left commander of the Eastern Palace? Quickly follow the Prince of Shouchuan to arrest Wei Qingqing and his family. Following Li Dan's orders, the soldiers of the Southern Office were mobilized. Once these soldiers are mobilized, they will not know the movements of the other soldiers. The commanders of the different routes will not be able to communicate with each other, making it even more impossible for them to change sides. At the same time, once these soldiers accept the order, even if it is just following the Prince of Xiang's orders and not leaving the camp, it is equivalent to expressing his stand. The Southern Office is stabilized.